My name is Jen Yoakley. I head up global marketing as well as corporate communications for Trilliant Networks. We are a communications company. Communication is a networking company headquartered in Cary, North Carolina. We provide communication solutions for cities, utilities here locally and around the world. So regarding our safety message, we don't have any scheduled fire alarms today. Please look around you for the nearest exit. And no, okay, all kidding aside, I'm really excited you guys are here with us today as we continue to navigate through COVID. And I really hope you guys stay safe and be well. Um, so as Jessica said, today you're going to hear from some of the finest energy industry communications experts that are going to discuss how their companies are staying connected and attuned to their stakeholders during COVID-19 while looking ahead to business and economic recovery. Our format, as Jessica said, will include an overview of the organizations followed by a panel discussion and participant Q&A. Please use the chat function in Zoom if you have any questions, and I'll try to get to them. If we have too many, we may not get there. Our panelists today include Chris Kruger, who is a Senior Manager, Coalition Management and Grassroots Programs at NEI, Eloise Rupesky, who is a Business Development Manager at Pillsbury Law, David McGowan, the Southern Regional Director at American Petroleum Institute at API, Diane Chase, who is a Senior Vice President at C4CS, Matt Hale, Director of Business Development and Commercial Marketing at Tantalus Systems. So, without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started with Chris.
Thank you. So thanks for the opportunity to be a part of this panel and this conversation. I really appreciate it. As Jen mentioned, I'm with NEI, the Nuclear Energy Institute. I'll take a few minutes on NEI, and then I think the structure is I'll do a couple minutes on communication and how we're managing stakeholders, and then turn it back to Jen. I think is that the flow that we'd like to go with. Okay, great. So just for folks that might not be familiar, NEI has hundreds of members across the world, and with their involvement develops policy on key legislative and regulatory issues that affect the industry. Our members own and operate nuclear power plants, reactor designers and advanced technology companies, architect and engineering firms, fuel suppliers and service companies, consulting servicing, manufacturer companies, companies involved in nuclear medicine and nuclear industrial applications, universities and research laboratories, law firms, labor unions, international electricity utilities. So it's a wide swath of companies. We're based in Washington, D.C., and we work to provide a unified voice before Congress, the executive branch, state and local legislators, and federal regulators, as well as international organizations on key policy issues. So I encourage you to check out our website to learn more. As mentioned at the top, my role is in government affairs on coalitions, grassroots, grasstops management, and that's a part of our external affairs division. So I'll start kind of quickly with internal communications, pivot to external stakeholder communications, industry communications, and then hand it back to Jen. So first thing to think about is a trade association that we were based in Washington, D.C. We have roughly 100 folks or so who were in the heart of Washington, D.C. as this pandemic was approaching. So staying aligned, staying organized, staying communicated was key as how we were going to approach what our response would be and how we would ultimately end up remote working. We've been remote working as a trade association since the middle of March. It's been a very organized and choreographed effort. As you can imagine, we are the trade association for the nuclear energy sector. So emergency preparation, communication are all hallmarks of the industry. So as the trade association, we were just an extension of that. Some of the tools and techniques, we were trained on remote working. We were trained on all the different forms of technology. We do have a pandemic plan in place. It's been around for many years. It has 4 stages. We're in the 3rd stage now, remote working. We have regular weekly all-staff calls still through GoToMeet. We're on the phone. We're on FaceTime often. We use technology. We use Slack. We use new communication tools and techniques to make sure everyone is aligned and communicating. And currently, we don't have, there's plans, there's conversations in place for what a return to office might look like. I think everyone is kind of, in Washington, D.C. at least, we're kind of governed by many, the District of Columbia. A lot of folks live in Maryland. A lot of folks live in Virginia, obviously the federal government. So it's still Washington, D.C., where the trade association is, where I work and live, is still in phase 1 of our reopening plan. So I think phase 2, phase 3, somewhere down the road in the summer, we'll be ready and orchestrate on a very clear and safe reopening. So let me pause there and pivot to external communications, working with our stakeholders, working with the industry, adapting and preparing for COVID-19 recovery and how NEI has managed this pandemic. As part of the nation's critical infrastructure, utilities have plans in place to ensure nuclear power plants are prepared for and ready to respond to a pandemic, with the goal of minimizing disruption to operations. The nuclear energy industry has maintained business continuity and pandemic preparedness guidance and procedures since 2006. So because nuclear power plant emergency plans are designed to address a wide variety of challenges, including the natural phenomenon such as hurricanes, companies that own these facilities have been able to leverage that knowledge and infrastructure to support their pandemic response efforts and hopefully their recovery efforts. Some of the tools and industry communication tools that we communicated with stakeholders were more than just the usual suite of bringing the industry together to communicate and share best practices. There's a lot of new tips and tools and techniques that were part of the pandemic. So I want to tick through a few of them for you. Was messaging around pandemic response plan, messaging around pandemic planning at nuclear power plants. There's a lot of news that we put out, a lot of different blogs that were part of the industry's response to coronavirus, how nuclear plants are responding to the industry. Many, many, many letters to lawmakers, whether it was in support of nuclear power plants, whether it was to state and local, all again trying to unify one voice and being supportive of the industry. We also stood up a new digital campaign that recognizes the work and sacrifice of the men and women in our industry and underscores for policymakers that the nuclear industry is part of the nation's essential critical infrastructure. It was a great spot that I think a lot of people enjoyed. We also provided a lot of social media copy during this time that folks could use to just, tie into the message that the national emergency, keeping the lights on in hospitals and medical facilities is crucial. And as part of the nation's critical infrastructure, nuclear energy plays a vital role in providing reliable and resilient energy to the grid. Additional industry operational, regulatory, and government relations tools that were deployed during this time to kind of inform and communicate stakeholders were regular calls with our CNOs, with our communicators, government affairs, legal, all working to ensure that nuclear workers were essential employees and that the industry is committed to maintaining safe, reliable operations in times of challenging national circumstances. And I think we've been, as responsive and working hand in glove as we possibly could with our members and with the industry, whether it was with lawmakers, whether it was with the Electricity Subsector Coordinating Council and the federal government to make sure nuclear workers were essential to infrastructure, prioritizing testing and PPE at all of the plants and the facilities. It's been a well-organized and choreographed effort of communication and tools and technology. One final piece of this is I'll pivot to grassroots and grass tops communications. A lot of my role there is working with third parties. The industry has a coalition called Nuclear Matters, which is, I know, worked numerous times with E4 Carolinas. This is really the advocacy arm of the nuclear power sector. And similar to the trade association, they have been working to continue to update stakeholders, provide regular communication about being safe if you were going to go to the polls, how to find your polling location, being smart with the CDC guidelines, as there was still a national election year playing out, even though many of the primaries have moved, how to be a part of that, how to be responsible. And also using the same kind of themes of messaging to be a part of the news cycle, communicating the value of safety and the essential workforce against the backdrop of the pandemic. So Let me stop there, Jen, at the top, and I can hand it back to you, and I'll be ready for the conversation and questions.
Sure, Chris, thank you so much. It was cool to hear how you aligned your organization and really promoted those essential workers. Thank you so much for sharing.
Absolutely.
Next, we're going to move over to Eloise Rapinski, who is a business development manager at Pillsbury Law. Eloise?
Wonderful. Thank you, Jen. So I work at Pillsbury Winthrop Shaw Pittman, which is a 700 attorney law firm with offices across the United States and around the world, and we have a total workforce of about 1,400 employees. We are a cross-industry and multi-practice law firm that helps clients in the energy, nuclear, renewables, oil and gas, as well as technology, financial services, and real estate and construction industries. And our leadership is comprised of an elected board comprised of partners and an executive management team that also includes several non-lawyers on the executive team as well, including our Chief Strategy Officer, CIO, and CFO, and as well as the Chief Human Resources Officer. So one of the main issues that we've been working on is that we didn't actually have a full pandemic response planned already for the firm. And so very quickly, I think I've actually worked with several NEI folks as well as we work on our local DC Export Controls Conference. And so we were actually trading emails in the beginning of the pandemic because from one day to the next, we went from being a fully office-based company to closing all of our offices and only allowing very limited staff there. And so we had to actually test our communication systems internally to make sure that our IT system could actually support the increase in bandwidth of our remote workers. So that was one of the first issues that we had to deal with in order to make sure that everyone would be able to work remotely. And then from there, we really were focusing on increasing brand awareness for clients, facilitating engagements and collaboration across all of our different practices and industry, because as Chris mentioned as well, there were numerous clients that were dealing with the same issues that we were, not just in nuclear, but across real estate and construction, employment, and making sure that all of our clients were aware of the liability issues that were coming to fruition and aware that Pillsbury was able to guide them through any questions that they might have, given that this was a completely unforeseen situation. And so since then, Pillsbury did very rapidly create an internal and external COVID-19 response team that comprises of over 70 different attorneys, and the attorneys are from our crisis management, government contracts, cybersecurity, public policy, real estate and construction, energy, industries, and sections. And so with that, we're really able to look at the macro picture of how all of these different industries and our clients are being impacted. And with that, we've submitted and processed since the beginning of March over 350 tailored client alerts. So whether it's for employment matters to different industry issues, we've really been looking at that and trying to turn those around very quickly. And then we've had over 10,000 webinar participants and have held over 50 webinars, again, looking at liability issues, how the energy industry is responding to different challenges, to employment matters, real estate and construction, and numerous other topics. And this has really been a focus of our attorneys working specifically with the business development team as well as with clients and aligning our content that we're putting out with client demand. So clients letting us know, do you have this experience? Have you looked at that? And then us being able to quickly evaluate the issue that they're working on resolving and providing that tailored content as well. So it's not just been communications internally with our board and our executive team, reassuring the workers that are working remotely, and making sure that everyone has the appropriate resources at home, but then also coupling that with how do we respond to client demands, how do we have business continuity for them, especially when courts are closing, opening, everyone's going through childcare at home to caretaking responsibilities, and then also having a remote workforce. So it's been a very exciting time at Pillsbury, and it's been one that has been, for the most part, very seamless as we've transitioned to just making sure that everyone is communicating and having those daily calls as well. So thanks for having me.
Perfect. Thank you so much. It's really, really fascinating. We've already seen two extremes. We've got NEI that had that full pandemic response plan, and then you have other folks, and Trilliant was in the same situation. This is just something, we didn't have a full pandemic response plan. We had a business continuity plan, and I imagine that a lot of other companies are in that area. So thank you for the companies that were on the leading edge, and thank you to the companies that were really taking the time to educate the rest of us about how to navigate this. It's really important. So we're going to move on to David McGowan, who is from API.
Thank you, Jen. Good morning, everyone. But thank you for the opportunity to join this morning, to give you a little bit of a perspective from my standpoint, as well as the standpoint of the American Petroleum Institute, who I represent. Jen, as you said, I'm the Southern Region Director for API. We're the very similar to Chris and NEI. We're the National Trade Association for the oil and natural gas industry. We represent really all sectors of the industry. Again, much like NEI. In fact, Chris, I'm glad you had a chance to go first, because I can just kind of put ditto remarks around a lot of what you said, because our organizations are structured very similarly, and have a lot of the same operations and business continuity and different divisions that do different things. But from a government affairs standpoint specifically is kind of the angle that I wanted to speak from. That's what I deal most directly with. And as the Southern Region Director, it's my responsibility in the 9 southeastern states of the U.S. To help manage our legislative, regulatory, and public affairs activities. We're a little different, at least for right now, than a lot of other national trade associations, in the sense that we have state directors on the ground in most of those states. And they know their states and their policymakers and their issues a heck of a lot better than I do sitting in Raleigh, North Carolina. And so I try to empower them to do their job and to be successful, and give them the tools that they need to do those things, and really just kind of stay out of their way. But this pandemic presented a different situation. And to Chris's point, we did have a pandemic plan. It obviously was not fit for purpose, so to speak. It needed to be adapted pretty substantially for this situation and this environment. Business continuity was, for most folks, as it was for most folks, really first and foremost on our mind. From an internal trade association standpoint, but then also supporting our member companies, again, very similar to what Chris described, in making sure that they had the tools that they needed and the information that they needed, the information flow, dual flow, from them to us, to policymakers, and then from policymakers or regulators through us back down to them, so that each party was informed as possible in the fog of war that an event like this creates, but also that there was some integration there, and there was an ability and at least a tremendous amount of effort put into ensuring that the industry was speaking with one voice. We were faced at the same time that the pandemic hit us in mid-March, I guess. Friday, March 13th was our first remote work day, association-wide, for all of our offices, both in the U.S. and international. That was a test day for us, similar to what Eloise says, where we tested our systems, really tried to understand where the flaws might be and where we might need to make some improvements over the weekend so that we could go into the following week in a remote work posture. And that's in fact what we did, and we've been very successful in doing that. I think some of the challenges that we experienced, and again, I touched on this briefly, but as we were getting into this pandemic, the oil and gas industry was also in the midst of a significant amount of market turmoil. In fact, much as this pandemic was unprecedented, the situation, the market, the oil markets we're in at that time was unprecedented as well. We had the dual shock of a really significant flooding of the market by OPEC and that arrangement back in mid-February. So coming into mid-March, we were already in an oversupply situation, and then the bottom fell out of demand as well. So we had a really truly unprecedented, and I know that word is thrown around pretty casually here lately, but this situation in our market truly was. We had never had that dual shock of a supply glut at the same time we had a tremendous collapse in demand. And so that led to a number of challenges just logistically in the industry with product movement, with meeting regulations. For instance, we had a tremendous amount of winter blend gasoline that was backing up throughout the country. And most folks may not be aware, but in about 42 states on April 1st, the law says you can't sell that winter blend gasoline anymore. And so we had a very short window of time, about 2 weeks, where we had to communicate very effectively and efficiently with our regulators at the federal, state, and even local level in some instances to seek waivers of those regulations so that there was product that remained available for the general public, even though demand had collapsed. If we weren't able to sell that winter blend product after April 1st, then we wouldn't have been able to sell product, period. And obviously that would have created a tremendous problem as well. So we had to work very expeditiously with our external partners in the regulatory agencies at EPA and all the state ag departments and departments of environmental quality, air quality divisions, and even down to the local level. For instance, Mecklenburg County, North Carolina, there in Charlotte, has their own local air division. So it took a lot of coordination with our member companies to understand what the situation was, what the impacts were ultimately going to be to the consuming public, and then be able to communicate that to the regulators and the policymakers so that they could make informed decisions about what they needed to do to help alleviate the problems that we were seeing. So I think if I could just summarize by saying that we really had three primary communication channels. We had an internal communication channel just within our trade association, our staff. We had an internal coronavirus task force that was stood up to help plan and execute those plans internally with the trade association. But then we also had our member companies, again, similar to Chris and his organization, that we were communicating with. And then the third set really is the external stakeholders, but there's really two groups there for us, and that was the policymakers, the regulators, the legislators, governor's office, et cetera. But then also with the general public, and much as Chris described, we had a robust communications plan with the general public and the media to help understand not only how the industry was responding to the pandemic, but also how the industry was responding to the market conditions and the situations that created. So we really had a dual challenge, and I think we've been incredibly successful given the difficulties that we encountered and the fact, obviously, that no one had really experienced anything like this before. There are, of course, a lot of lessons learned. We've had ongoing debriefing sessions. I think that's going to be something key that I would recommend for other organizations to do if you haven't already. It's never really too soon to begin having those reflective conversations about what you did well, what you can improve upon, Hopefully we don't see another situation like this again, but I think we all recognize the likelihood that we will at some point, and we're much better prepared now going into that. And I think to the extent that we can reflect on what we've done and learn those lessons, that we will be much better prepared, assuredly, going forward. So let me stop there, Jen, but happy to take questions here when it's appropriate.
Yeah, David, no, thank you so much. You're right. Unprecedented times is something that we're hearing a lot. And it has been unprecedented times. You hit it on the head. We're dealing with internal communications. We're dealing with our customers, and we're dealing with the general public. I mean, we've got to address the needs of our stakeholders, of our shareholders, if that's a thing, as well as our member companies. So, you know, it's been a very a 360 view, and that's not something that we've typically had to tackle holistically. So the challenges
Right.
are definitely interesting. Thank you so much, David.
Sure.
So we're going to move over to Diane, who is a Senior Vice President at C4CS, to talk about how they are handling this, or sorry, the services that they're offering through this.
Right. Thanks, Jen. Good morning, everyone. I come from a little bit of a different seat, if you will, in terms of being a consultant in this crisis and helping client partners move through it successfully so that they can build even a better future as we really evolve during this time. So C4CS is a strategic communication and crisis management firm. And a couple of slides. Just a couple quick points about C4CS. Our expertise really is in crisis communication, consulting, planning, preparedness, and training for internal and external stakeholders. And our client partners do really cross the gamut in terms of disciplines, but we do a lot of work in the energy industry and have really enjoyed being a part of E4 Carolinas and connecting with the energy industry and all of the great people who are here today. So thanks, Jess, for putting that up for a second. And just wanted to kind of share a few thoughts on what I've heard so far. And I really loved David's point about the one voice policy. That is something we really stress in terms of working with our clients and making sure that they are aligned in their communication. And why is that important? That's important because people they're fearful. There's a lot of mistrust and anxiety and wondering if they really can trust that you are doing the right thing. So here's an opportunity to communicate in a way that builds confidence in you and your organization. And what that does is keep your stakeholders engaged, aligned, and they build actual loyalty with you because they see you as competent and they're confident that you are moving forward with them through this to a better future. And crisis becomes clarity. Clarity really is built, by looking at what really matters. When you're in a crisis, you have to focus. It's a time to evolve. It's a time to get new insight and to learn maybe new ways of doing things, new ways of communicating. It's also a really important time to learn more about your stakeholders, to understand what they care about, to communicate with them with compassion, clarity, consistency, and it all builds culture. So what is the culture of your company right now that is going to keep your stakeholders engaged and keep you successful through this pandemic and into the future? And it's going to be really interesting. I'm eager to hear about some of the specific messaging that you folks have been using, and also the cadence. So what is the cadence? Did you have a plan for in your communication plan? Was there a consistency and a cadence, and what channels did you use? And how did you find out where people needed to hear from you? How could you best reach them? How could you best build a two-way communication channel that's so critical right now? People are full of questions, and again, they look to you as the experts to answer those questions for them. Talking to your employees, to your internal stakeholders is so critical out of the gate. What we say is tell the family first. Your employees are your most powerful branding tool. They become your ambassadors and your advocates in tough times. If they look at you and say, I am confident my company is doing the right thing. I'm confident they're going to keep us in the loop. They're going to be transparent. They're going to communicate with us consistently, not just now, but going forward. So building that reputation right now, it's a huge opportunity to do that. It's a huge opportunity to really evolve as an organization. And one of the things that I really believe in, and C4CX really believes in very much, is that when you put your people and your purpose as your priorities, profits will follow. That's one of my mantras. And I really do want to not take up too much time. I'm eager for questions and discussion. So I'll turn it back over to you, Jen.
Perfect, Diane. Thank you so much. You're absolutely right in bringing back out that theme of a one voice policy. We've got to be aligned in our communications to drive engaged, connected workforce. You know, and compassion, clarity, and consistency is just a beautiful and touchy-feely thing that sometimes we forget is really important.
It really is. And because we've kind of come up with that feeling that, you know, work is work and personal is personal, and I have to talk to you kind of more like, you know, an unfeeling robot, right? But
Yeah.
now is when you use the power of human connection, especially since we're only in, you know, we're not in 3D anymore in front of each other. So we really have to speak with others and communicate in a really human way.
Yep. No, thank you so much, Diane. That's really, really good to remember. And finally, we are going to hear from Matt Hale, who is the Director of Business Development and Commercial Marketing at Tantalus. Matt?
I want to give you a little overview of Tantalus so you understand who we are, and then I'll talk about what we're doing relative to COVID-19. So Tantalus is here in Raleigh. Much like Trilliant, we sell advanced metering systems focused on public power, so mostly smaller utilities, or cities, municipalities, and the utility division of cities, and then rural cooperatives. We've got an office here in Raleigh. We're headquartered out of Vancouver, Canada, and have about 180 customers across the US and Canada. We've moved to the Caribbean as well. And like I said, about half split between municipal communities and rural cooperatives. So we do not sell to the larger entities, investor-owned utilities, or the Duke Powers of the world out there. When we looked at COVID-19, and I'll tell you, we didn't have a pandemic plan to start, but we jumped on it pretty quick. And I'll tell you what, this isn't corporate, this is my perspective on what we tried to do. We looked at the challenges that were ahead of us, and then I'll take you through what we're doing to address and hopefully resolve and mitigate those to the degree that we can during this time. So the first challenge, we want to be sure that our employees are safe and healthy. I'm sure like you all. And we've done a lot to help with that. And I think I've done a pretty good job in what we've gotten to so far. The second thing is to make sure that our customers continue to deliver on their commitment to communities. So we sell to electric, water, and gas utilities. They are essential. Even in a pandemic, when you go home and you turn that light switch, you're expecting your light to come on. And we want to make sure that our technology and our services are enabling them and keeping them up and running. And there's a lot of momentum behind that, right? Both with Tantalus, our internal folks, and then maintaining communications, planning, expectations relative to what we can do for our customers. The challenge kind of tactically that we encountered during this time, and even previous to pandemic, was relative to product. There's always issues. We make product both in the US and overseas. So especially overseas, if you're bringing product in, there can be silicon issues, there can be technology issues. There can also be issues where cities, states, countries are shut down relative to the pandemic. So we want to make sure that as we could, we were managing inventory and access to asset for ourselves and our customers the best that we could during this timing. And then just, kind of fun is we're talking on a virtual conference right now. We do a lot of marketing both at our partner conferences. We have our own Tantalus Users Conference. We attend industry events. I know David was on the phone earlier. I see him at several of the events that are around. And we had to figure out what we're going to do there, because that is a great opportunity for Tantalus to exchange information with our customers, our prospects, our partners, that one-on-one give and take that we were concerned about, and making sure that we maintain those relationships. So I'll tell you, I just broke it down into what we're doing for employees to start. We jumped on this pretty quick. I went back in my database or my folder and looked at our COVID-19 plan, and the first 6-page plan we had was March 11th. So our HR director and our CEO came out pretty quickly with how we would react to this from an employee perspective. And I've listed some of the items, and again, it's like a 6 or 7-page plan. May not be a lot for you guys, but for Tantalus, we're pretty informal, so that's a decent amount of material. But we looked at what we're doing to help our employees prevent any type of spread. And of course, with that, we went home for the most part. Our employees have been home for almost 3 months now. I'm back in the office as we're reopening slowly. I'm alone here. So we have about 3,000 square feet. It's me. I do have pants on today. I'm fully dressed. So it's not that informal, but most of our folks are still at home, except the folks in Vancouver that really are there on a daily basis for whether it's manufacturing, R&D, some of the corporate functions. Almost all of our commercial folks are working from home offices. We have a travel policy. We put that in place. I'm sure you guys did too. We have limited air travel, must be approved by the CEO, and really no one's traveling by air by now. Even by car, we're trying to limit that. So I'm on a daily call with our sales team, and those guys are itching to get out there, but they are doing all virtual communications right now. We did put together personal health and well-being guidelines, and I'm going to show you some other things that our executive team put together to help employees as they're working from home, not getting out as much, or trying to do things differently. I mean, it's for all of us, it's been an odd time. So how do you handle that both from a well-being or mental perspective, as well as just work side? And then we've got protocols when I'm in the office. I'm in my own office right now, so I don't have a mask on. Our policy is going forward, any type of communal room, and I'm sure you guys have run into this, we're wearing masks. We have a limit on the number of people that we really do want to see in a room at any one time, and it depends on size and other things. And there's a cleaning policy as well. Like I said, we had a COVID-19 team from day one, and that team was made up of our CEO, our COO, and our HR director. And they really have been very careful, I think conscientious, compassionate. I heard that word about helping to address this situation. It has been great to see our CEO take an active involvement. I mean, we talk about it, I'm getting a little tired of it, we talk about it daily. So he's instituted daily stand-up calls. Those stand-ups are for my team. I own a commercial team. We do that. It's just 15 minutes every day. So we get the sales team together, our business development, which I lead, some of our marketing folks. It used to be at the start of this issue a little bit more around health, how's everybody's feeling. It's kind of merged into, let's just touch base quickly, make sure everyone's okay. If there are any issues, let us know. And it's kind of fun. We do a question every day. We have a fun question. One day it will be, would you rather travel to the moon or the deepest ocean out there? And we take a poll and we share it. We kind of laugh about it. It's not just the commercial team that does a stand-up call. It is the COVID team I mentioned, and it's our senior leadership team. So those folks are on a call every day to talk about these issues. I will tell you, we're a fun company. So about every 2 weeks, maybe more than that, we have a virtual happy hour at the end of Friday. A couple times, I think it was Thursday, and it's a little bit late one day to accommodate the Pacific time zone. But if you want, of course, it's not forced. We can enjoy ourselves with maybe an adult beverage or not. But getting on the phone that's the whole company if they want to join. So we have about 140 people. There's usually about half of those folks online, just enjoying a half hour or so together in a more personal kind of interactive environment. From a communications perspective, like I said, our team has been really focused on that. And it's not just Tantalus pushing stuff out. I do have a couple examples of that here. Our emotional well-being and insights regarding Tantalus that you see on the screen, those we wrote on our own but our CEO has been pretty active in finding what else can we be talking about. So we've got an example here of how to work from home from HBR. The other thing, he went out and found there's a course on happiness on Coursera. I don't know if you guys have seen that, but just saying, hey, if you want to, he took the course, it's interesting. It's on happiness and well-being and how to maximize that or optimize that, whether that's in a pandemic like this or just generally. So he's really trying hard to, keep our morale up as we go through this. From a customer perspective, we've tried hard from the start, like the other folks on this team have mentioned, this call have mentioned, making sure we're working with our customers to understand what they're going through and tell them or help them understand what we want to do in this environment to ensure that they're enabled going forward. They're essential. Again, you're looking around, my lights are on here, power's working fine. That's who we sell to. We're going to keep them up and running. So we, about after a week or so of the pandemic, put together a webinar series. This was focused on our customers. We did this weekly for 4 weeks to start. Some of it was relatively technical on how to use our system better, surprisingly, or maybe not. We had a lot of interest in that. We've had over 100 folks on each of these webinars. We've had a ton of downloads too. But learning more, it's a great time to learn more about what your tools and assets can do for you that you may not on a regular basis. Some of our folks are working either remotely, our customers working remotely, or some of them are kind of splitting time. They're coming into the office every other day or working every other day. So it's a great time for them to take, look, and learn. And that's what the webinars were designed to get at. They were so successful that we've instituted now an ongoing effort. We have 3 more series that are set up to go. They're not related to the pandemic. They're just related to our products, how we can help you. And based on that, we thought, okay, we've got some opportunity to help. We've got great products that not everyone's taking advantage of. Jen, you're a trillion. I'm sure you feel the same way. We wish we could sell everything all the time. But we actually went out and said, okay, for a period of time, we're going to enable access to some of the products that we think are really relevant to customers right now, and that's at no cost. So we've got a time limit on that to start. I don't know where we'll go, but try some products that we think are going to help you during this time and can help going forward. Some of those are around consumption, what's happening in the electric world, what's happening from a consumption perspective at individual locations. And then there's some stuff that, believe it or not, I think it's a good thing. We have a partner that does debt recovery and debt assistance. Coming out of this, for our utilities, there's going to be a lot of, I don't want to say the word pain, but there's going to be a lot of effort to make sure that they're addressing non-payments, slow payments, and we understand it, but there's tools that can help with that and make it both comfortable or as comfortable as possible for both the utility and their own customers. So we set up a relationship with a partner that has a promotion around how to help with that. So that's ongoing now, this webinar series. Then from our customer perspective, these folks are out there, they're working hard every day to keep power up and running. You know that. They want to be very careful about interaction with people. So they're trying to be very careful about when they have to make a residential visit, if at all. They're very no contact. A lot of our tools enable them to avoid that or mitigate that to the degree that they can. So they are doing other things like working with customers and consumers on payment policies. There is no service disconnect at this time for most of our customers. So in the electricity world, if you get behind for an extended period of time, you may get shut off. That's not happening now. So utilities, and the utilities we sell to are nonprofits. So their reason for being is from a cooperative perspective. They have members to keep their members, low cost electricity reliable and online. So they're doing everything they can to help their own customers. So I think that's about all I had. But we just to reiterate, we've really tried to maintain communications. I don't know. We don't have someone mentioned frequency or how often. I don't know we have that set in sand yet, but probably every 1 or 2 weeks I see a note going from our CEO to customers in general. Now that webinar series was weekly, so we're maintaining contact, and then our sales team is in general contact virtually, at least on a very regular basis. That's been the key. Just so far, we've had a pretty good, results going through this process. It's going to be an interesting end of year, but it seems to. I think we've got a lot of extended relationships now that maybe weren't there before. We're calling on folks that we haven't had the chance to do so. So, anyways, that's what we're up to. Any questions? I'm more than open to help answer. Thanks.
Wonderful, Matt. Thank you so much. It's really interesting. I've heard throughout all of this, and Matt, you said it so well. We had to think about things differently as we were navigating this COVID challenge because it touched every aspect of what we were doing. And it is about engaging and enabling and doing those things. So, I appreciate just hearing a brief overview from all the panelists. What we'd like to do is move into a Q&A time. And guys, please feel free to mute or unmute yourselves and ask a question to any of our panelists. And we will start going through that. If you're more comfortable using chat, please feel free to do that, and I'll pick them up from there. One thing I have for all of you guys is, we talked about essential operations and how do we keep our employees safe? How do we keep our customers safe while keeping the business moving forward? And that's sort of a theme that came up in a lot that we discussed. And it's really interesting because you have to think about it a little bit differently. And we have to think about the ways that we can enable utilities and cities and members and the clients and all of that stuff in different ways. Does anybody want to talk about that a little bit? Maybe.
I don't mind starting, Jen. I think one of the big challenges that we faced from a business continuity standpoint, if I'm understanding your question correctly, more with our member companies, was cross-border travel between states. Texas and Louisiana, for instance, was an issue. Alabama-Florida border was an issue due to challenges, I think initially with the Florida Highway Patrol and the way that they were blocking entry into the state. So cross-border movement of employees for refineries, for instance, or for fuel terminals or pipelines or whatever it may have been. And I'm sure there are other folks here on the call that experience very similar issues. I know it obviously wasn't just restricted to us, but that was a big issue that we faced initially, almost right away. As the lockdowns started and started kind of cascading across the country, and the lack of uniformity, not only from state to state, but from local jurisdiction to even local jurisdiction within a state, created a number of challenges that were really difficult to work through. And I'm not sure, quite frankly, what the answer is to those. I think in a perfect world, perhaps some sort of a national declaration that at least sets some sort of basic level of standard may have been helpful for the business community. I understand why there were reasons that they didn't want to do that, but I do think that was a challenge that hopefully can be addressed and avoided next time we have a similar situation. We've dealt with it on hurricanes and things like that, but it's much more regional in nature. Everyone has a much more established playbook for dealing with those scenarios. The states do, the industries do. And so this one was a huge curveball in that respect.
All right, David, thank you so much. All right, so we did hear from a lot of you guys that you were creating task force, or you may have been working or consulting with to develop those task force to manage the COVID comms plan. Can you talk about what motivated the use of the task force? What members you selected? We've heard that there was a CEO, the COO, and HR. We heard from Matt that marketing is involved. So it would be great for the panelists all in general to kind of talk about the task force development and how you picked the people that you picked and how you set your purpose and your cadence. And, if you didn't have a task force, should you? There's a lot of questions.
So I'm happy to kick off this question, but one of the things that we were really noticing very early on is how much our attorneys responded and worked and collaborated in person. And so the hardest thing working remotely was trying to facilitate those discussions, but then also realizing that a lot of the issues that they were being confronted with were not just siloed to that one office or to that one practice. And so the COVID-19 response team was really developed looking at the numerous different industries and practices that were being impacted. And so at the forefront, we were looking to really have a full picture view so that we could respond to different areas. And then we're setting up calls so that they could actually communicate and have that dedicated time to proactively think about ways that they can troubleshoot problems for clients and not have to reinvent the wheel every single time. So that was really our main focus. And then separately, a lot of the other practice groups, so the nuclear energy team that I work with, communications section, international trade, and others, we also set up weekly and in some cases daily calls so that team members really were able to speak to one another and make sure that they were aware of the resources that they had internally and then be able to delegate and respond to clients effectively in that way. So that was sort of how we build up momentum for our task force.
Wonderful. Thank you for such a great response.
Jen, this is Matt, just for us on the, oh, I'm sorry, Chris.
Go ahead, Matt, please.
We have that a COVID specific team that's made up of very few number of individuals that are really focused on, the issue itself. And the way what we've decided to do is kind of bubble up issues to the team that can then act quickly. So like I said, I'm on a call with my team every day, as is every other department manager in the company. So it's not just me, it's our field services lead, our finance lead. And any issues that come from that will bubble up through us to a team that can take them and then address quickly, the specifics of that. So we do have that small COVID team. Our senior leadership team, this is something they do meet daily again on COVID, but that's comprised of different individuals than just the COVID team. And we're looking at it so that we don't have a huge number of people talking over each other in an environment like that. Keeping the teams are very focused on it small, but bubbling up with issues and then addressing them.
Great, Matt. Thank you. Chris?
Yeah, sure. I'll just build out some of these responses with kind of our perspective. We did have an internal task force that was meeting multiple times a week from an internal standpoint that did have senior leadership, head of communications, head of government affairs, and also meetings and membership. That's a big piece of what we do, kind of to what David was talking about, and I know Diane was talking about, is bringing industries and groups together around one voice. In addition, National Trade Association, we bring the industry together around events. We had our annual meeting a couple weeks ago. The spring, early summer is, busy time for typically, right? For travel, for going to state capitals, for going to the U.S. Capitol. A lot of major meetings would be happening. So we've been taking a look at every milestone going back to March when our first events got canceled that third week of March. We're moving some of our events to virtual now later in the year, and just everybody's kind of, I think, on pause, and we'll see what the fall looks like. But I think that was a piece that escaped me in my opening about membership and meetings and events. It's crucial to so many industries and so many pieces of any industry really, that we're just kind of trying to figure out what that new normal is going to look like. And then externally, we did have a lot of regular calls with our CNOs, talking to everyone at the plants, sharing best practices, the communicators sharing best practices in their local and regional area, legal, as Eloise has touched on a lot of this, that what's happening and how does that take a different shape. So all of that was happening. I think, our sector was very much prepared for emergency planning and the readiness of emergency. So laying that in over a pandemic has been successful for us. But I do think, you need these task force, you need these regular touch points of communication, smaller groups that are able to actually have meaningful dialogue, not a cattle call that is hard to kind of break through, but then providing useful direction and feedback. So I'll leave it there and turn it back to you.
No, thank you very much. That's a great perspective. And then finally, Diane, you, I'm sure, had a hand in just helping formulate what these teams should be and some of this messaging. Do you want to talk about that a little bit and how you help guide some of these creations?
Thanks, Jen. So many good points and good comments from everyone here in terms of really targeting their stakeholders and what they care about. Internal stakeholders, very importantly, as mentioned previously. So in terms of creating your crisis response team, those leaders should be identified and obviously trained and practiced in scenario crisis communication and response. But for a specific issue, a crisis like this, to bring in subject matter experts to address certain stakeholders' questions and concerns in a very, very timely way. People start feeling isolated and they disengage, and your employees may lose motivation, they may lose trust. And so it's even more important than ever to have two-way communication on a really consistent basis. You feel like, oh, it's too much, right? We have Zoomitis, but you cannot over communicate right now. You really can't. And so in terms of your crisis response team, I would look at those specific leaders, and I know Matt mentioned his CEO, COO, and HR, and I'm wondering about your chief communications officers, if they are front and center and at the table in terms of your crisis response team. I'd love to learn about that. And then at a strategic level, to remember that in order to move successfully through a crisis, it's a Venn diagram sort of thing. So you have the operational response, putting out the fire, so to speak, dealing with the pandemic, talking about precautions and safety measures and how to make sure that you are staying healthy and well. So operationally, managerially, here's where your leadership steps in and provides confidence, builds trust, builds reputation for your organization, and then the communications piece. The communications piece ties it all together, and it is so important that it does, have a seat at the table, because without clear, consistent, trustworthy communication, your crisis response will not be successful in the long term. Right? We can put out fires for now, but if no one knows that we put the fire out, they're not going to have the trust and confidence in us. So just kind of a reminder that managerial, that operational, and that communications person, that leadership should be at the table. And would love to hear what you guys think about that, and if that's something that's in practice at your organizations.
Yes, for us, absolutely. Diane, our VP of Comms is at the table in all of our executive team discussions, as well as in our COVID task force. And I think that has been a really key part of, again, having that integration between departments, particularly for a national trade association that has a lot of different departments, a lot of moving parts and pieces. Having someone that's looking at the broader strategic level of things and can communicate broadly, but then also, to your point, pull in the subject matter experts. And I think that's where probably for Chris and I both, we're fortunate that we have a tremendous bench of subject matter experts to pull from. And from a government affairs perspective, that's really important. And from a communications perspective, it's also really important. Oftentimes we can speak to the high level, a mile wide, an inch deep, but it's the subject matter experts that can really drill down into the issue. And there's a balance there, as I'm sure you can appreciate. And it's oftentimes they have trouble communicating in a way that the general public could maybe easily understand. And so it's finding that balance. But to answer your question directly, yes, absolutely. She's a key member of our team.
Fantastic. Right. And, to communicate in a way that conveys meaning and that resonates with whomever your audience is, and using language that they understand and will remember is really important.
From our side, Diane, so we're a pretty small company, so we share responsibilities. Between our CEO and then my boss, who's our chief sales and marketing executive here, they manage the communications that go externally to provide consistency. So, they're both on our senior leadership team, obviously. So they're very engaged in that. We don't have a specific communications manager. We do have a manager. We don't have an executive. That's my boss that runs that. So he's plugged in across the board, both on the operational side, so working for the CEO and on the COVID side of things, then also taking that forward from executional. How are we communicating? What is the consistency of message? What is the next step there? So that's how we handle it.
You made some really good points, Matt. I'm sorry, Jen. In terms of what I was taking away is that you are purpose-driven, but there's a culture. There's a culture of openness and collaboration and support, and that just builds your reputation. It's really impressive.
Thanks, Diane. Thanks to all of you for that. We've heard a lot of new words. We have a lot of new words in our vernacular. As a result of COVID-19, we've heard the new normal. This is unprecedented. Social distancing. A lot of us never thought we'd be in a position where we're building pandemic plans and communication plans and stuff like that. And we've heard from a lot of our panelists today about some did have a plan. Bless your hearts. I'm really glad you guys, a lot of y'all had plans. Some of us didn't. And it was working through that and feeling our way through that was really, really challenging. And we talked about the inputs into the plan and the stakeholders and can I get you guys to talk about how the stakeholders' input influence your pandemic plan, and how did you decide what battles to have and what battles to leave on the ground and things like that, because it's not easy. And for those that are tuning in, that are listening to this to try to figure out how to build these plans and incorporate this new vernacular and do all of this, it's not easy. But a lot of people have pushed forward for us. So let's talk about that a little bit. Maybe Matt, you want to talk about your stakeholders and how they input into your comm plan,
Sure.
And the responses? Yeah.
We looked at, I think, that small team I've been talking about really focused on the COVID issue as being our folks that understand what the WHO or the CDC or kind of governing bodies are recommending, the kind of the standards that they see in the industry, and then applying those relative to learnings from those those other groups I mentioned, the bubble up theory. So we have a couple guys that I can think of right now, and I'm talking about employees right now. So the customer side of it, I'll get to in a sec, that really have gotten into this and are very careful in helping to educate our team or other teams. Here's how you use a mask correctly. Here's, some folks are, and it's great, they understand that better than I do. Those ideas are coming up and then incorporated into the documentation I mentioned and distributed down from the COVID team. From a customer perspective, which I've listed that as our other stakeholder, I think we're just trying to listen to them and incorporate kind of their mindset as they go into market. So again, an electric cooperative or a public power entity is a nonprofit. They've had a service mentality. That is their reason for being. So not that they don't want to do well and keep prices down, that's one of their mandates, but they are service-oriented organizations. And so that comes across in our discussion with them. Maybe it's a cultural effort of guys, we have to make sure we're serious about this. We have to be careful about interaction with customers. We don't want to do that. I've seen folks, some of our previous or customers I've had interaction with, it, they'll deliver, if they're doing, fiber to the home type efforts, they'll literally wrap boxes up. They'll leave them on the doorstep with instructions on how an individual to manage. So no contact effort. And we try to incorporate that in what we do. But I think for us right now, it's really been more the employee side of things, where we're learning or trying to address and bring issues to a head and incorporate that in how we're reaching out and things we're doing relative to the COVID.
Perfect. Thank you, Matt. Yes,
Oh,
Chris.
And just, oh, go ahead, Chris.
Thanks. Okay. I'll just add to that, I guess, from kind of an external perspective. At NEI, we have a robust committee structure at NEI that I'm sure many people might be aware of. I'm sure it's something that David is exposed to at API. But so we're always balancing kind of that push and pull of member-facing priorities and what's important and what is the best place to stand on behalf of the industry. But I tell you, in a situation like this, having committee structure, having places where member companies, everybody has a place to go and talk about what is important to them in the legal space, in a regulatory space, in a government relations space, in a communication space, going up to leadership, executive committee, board level, and all coexisting with that internal stakeholder group of the pandemic, COVID relief and response group has been beneficial to us. I think it's been beneficial to the industry because everyone does have a seat at the table. Everyone does have a place where they can go and be heard, and that's all kind of fed into, coming around alignment, whether it's around, a stimulus legislation proposals, whether it's around, working with the NRC, whatever it might look like. But I think having committee structure, having things in place that were just kind of even more accelerated during a pandemic to achieve aligned communication has been really, really effective for us in our industry.
Thank you.
Chris, I would just echo that real quickly and say that oftentimes our governance and bureaucracy is an impediment. And we struggle.
Absolutely.
We struggle with that. And in this situation, for the most part, it has served us well, to your points there. Having policies in place and strict procedures in place and strict governance as it relates to issues and how you're going to handle those issues. We've had to adapt some of that on the fly, and it's rankled some feathers. But at least having that framework in place going into this event has been really helpful and served us well in the grand scheme of things, I think.
I can agree more. I think one of the things that Pillsbury did really well was being incredibly collaborative, but then also very nimble. So in the beginning, our communication strategy and plan was really being first to market from our competitors, putting together, thought pieces and thought leadership content that was, evaluating the scenarios and making sure that we can get that into our clients' hands as soon as possible. So the first, 6 weeks, I think we were averaging 20 or 30 alerts per week, which was incredibly high. Over 10 webinars, to really pinpoint the different industries and make sure that they're aware of the specific issues that they're being confronted with. But then on the flip side, we also created a reaction time newsletter. So anything that's COVID-19 related, it goes out to over 22,000 clients and prospect contacts that we have on our list. And then we consolidate with all the different liability reform issues, employment problems, anything that's related to COVID-19 will go out to that client list. And we did daily emails, and now we're doing Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And it's looking at that demand that we have and then getting that feedback, making sure that we're not sending out too many communications, and then being nimble to change our strategy and our approach and what we're highlighting in our newsletters as well. So it's making sure that we have an open line of communication internally within our department, but then also making sure that we're still responding to the issues that our clients have and aren't and that we're shifting our focus to topics that are really relevant to them and their business interests.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So the last question I have for you guys, and I hope that our other participants can come on board with some other questions, and this is a big one to think about. What is the biggest thing that you guys have learned navigating this? What is the one big takeaway?
I think the one big takeaway is being nimble. And as Diane was echoing and mentioning earlier, really being compassionate. So from our perspective, from a team, but then also working with clients, it's putting yourself in their shoes, looking at your coworker who might be a caretaker and a teacher and have, 5 or 6 new responsibilities and, different promotions that they're dealing with on top of their day-to-day, and just looking at what the best return on investment is. If, you're working on one project before and then all of a sudden you have to switch gears, how can you be a team player and make sure that you're responding to internal department needs and then working with the folks that you do, but then also evaluating what your clients need as well.
I would just build on that. I think that's a great answer. I would say personally and also kind of organizationally, I'm learning to be better with flexibility and patience. I think are 2 key pieces of all of this. We all get kind of go, run, constantly responding and getting back to people. We're all to some degree in kind of a client member serving capacity that you want to be timely and responsive. And I think that's continued, but I think, as Eloise kind of touched on, stepping in others' shoes, but just thinking about what's going on in everyone's home environment or work environment, that, focusing as maybe as timely or as quickly as folks are used to on something that's coming across your email is a challenge, I think, at times. I think everyone's moving to be more aware, and everyone's adapted to this kind of new normal for however long it is, or starts and stops. I don't think anybody knows that answer, but I think just kind of more front of mind, I think being flexible, having some patience, and just remembering, we're going to get through this. So.
Absolutely.
Jen, I call it adaptable optimism. So for us, adaptable is a word you guys, fits right in with flexibility, both from a personnel perspective. So the folks that you work with or work for you, and understanding the business but personal side of things. These are difficult times in a way. I don't know, how stressed somebody is, or their kids are stressed, and I have to take account of that. On the other hand, from the customer side, same thing. We've been able to, I think, adapt to requirements that our customers have relative to whether it's timing, financials, and being able to handle that in a relatively, I think, optimistic way, so that we know we're all about providing service. They're about providing service to their customers. We're going to get through this. It just is going to take some effort. It's going to take the opportunity, or take some time to develop an opportunity in a different way. So I've been generally pleased with our teams on calls where I'm listening in, and it's people are getting along pretty good so far. I mean, we haven't had a lot of pushback or misery index on the calls. So we try to stay optimistic out there and push ahead.
Okay. So we got some really good questions in chat. Everybody's starting to wake up now. It's 11, so the Price is Right may or may not be on for those of you at home. So what about how are you guys handling misinformation and updates to new learnings? I mean, the guidelines are changing every day. The situations and data are changing every day. How are you guys dealing with that?
I'll take that quickly, Jen. I think that has been one of the biggest challenges that we faced, both in maintaining internal information, but then also providing external information and making sure it's accurate and up to date. Going back to my comment earlier, kind of about the fog of war and how there's information flying fast and furious in an event like this, particularly in the early stages, and how difficult it can be to kind of flesh through that and cut through that to get your message out, but also how difficult it can be to really ascertain what truly is going on, and make decisions accordingly. And I think in this environment today, that's even more difficult than it's ever been for a variety of reasons. So I think from our perspective, it is that constant sourcing of information from a variety of sources and trying, again, to sort through it and determine what's accurate, what's not, what's up to date, what's not. That has been a tremendous challenge on the internal side of things, because there's a tremendous number of resources out there. There are a lot of organizations that are collecting information, but making sense of it has been difficult. And then on the external side, I think we've done a little better job. I feel like maybe others would dispute it, but of keeping our messages consistent and simple. And to Diane's comments earlier, and trying as best we can to speak with one voice. We had some really significant obstacles to that over the course of the last 3 months that have been specific to our industry. And that has really been a tremendous challenge, but I credit our CEO and our executive team for the tremendous amount of work that they've done behind the scenes to try to align our membership and to keep, again, to keep that one voice and the credibility that goes along with that, hopefully. So.
Perfect. Thank you, David.
And to echo David's comments, one of the things that we've really had to do, it's more internal misinformation of, we're based in numerous different states. And so it's, as the states open up, are certain offices going to force the employees to go back to the office? And so one of the things that our firm leadership has done is that they've gone ahead and tried to confront that head on anytime there's a rumor circulating. So they've been very clear that every office is going to follow the same protocol, and they're going to constantly reevaluate it given the developing situation. They also went ahead and circulated a survey to all employees asking them to gauge whether or not they'd be comfortable to return, yes or no, what prevents them, why would they want to, on the flip side, why would they choose to actually work remotely going forward? But that's been one of the things I've seen, is that we'll host firm-wide, leadership meetings, and then they allow all employees and staff to attend, and then we can actually hear what they have to say, so that it quells any rumors or misinformation that had been circulating.
Yeah, and surveys have been really interesting. We deployed that as well. We got some great information. Unfortunately, we did find out that 70% of our staff have no idea who the Tiger King is. So I was exceptionally upset by that statistic.
Oh my
so we
gosh,
did.
I love the survey piece, because that way you really can be proactive. You really staying, and it really is difficult, no doubt, David. But constant monitoring across whatever channels and with whatever tools you have, internally and externally, so that you can be proactive. And when a decision is made on a process or a policy or a protocol, to communicate it right away. I mean, just really get out in front of it. It's much better to control that messaging rather than to try and undo misinformation, right? So if you get the correct information out there, you control that narrative so that people, again, they have the information out of the gate. And if they say, well, what about this? You can just reiterate it rather than, starting over, shall we say. If they hear something that's incorrect first, and then you have to undo that, you're on your back foot already. So stay proactive, stay in touch with them, ask them how they're feeling. I was really surprised. I saw an internal communications survey a week or so ago, and employees were asked if their leadership, if their executive, if their CEO had reached out just to ask them how they are. Only 40% said yes. And this is what, almost 3 months into the pandemic, had not been asked, well, how you doing? You know? So just keeping them on board with you, letting them know that you really are paying attention to their whole work world has changed. And I think it's going to be fascinating to see what you all learn from your internal stakeholders about whether or not they're comfortable going back or whether they feel more productive. I read something yesterday where a lot of companies are saying their employees are more productive working at home, and they feel, you know, I know it's all over the map on that, but that was really kind of interesting too. But just making sure that you're monitoring so you can stay on top of it as much as possible. And social media is a killer, I get it, but have those key messages ready to go, those key decisions out the gate as soon as you can. That will help you stay on top of it.
Okay, so you brought up a really good point, Diane, and this relates to a question that we got in on the chat line, which is, guys, where did we fail? Where did we misstep? Where can we help the folks that are listening? What are our lessons learned so they can learn from them and not repeat what we've done?
I'm going to say that our lesson learned here is just not having been ready up front for this. I think we've done a good job in the addressing of an issue or a challenge that's come in front of us, but we certainly hadn't thought about that, to my knowledge, before this. So we were ready with backup generators and what's going to plan if, you know, there's a hurricane or we lose power in an office. But this type of effort, and I'm not looking back, I guess it's just you have to look and go, what could happen, and at least make some effort towards planning up front. We recovered pretty quick. Just to go back to the question that came previously, I'll say that we do our Diane, it's something you were talking about. We do a monthly town hall where everybody's on the phone, including the CEO, and it's extremely transparent as to what's happening within the company. But I don't know that anybody had thought about a pandemic before it happened. So that's the one thing I'd say. Just open your brain or mind up to what could potentially be out there, and at least make a start in addressing it.
Yeah.
I love that. I love the town hall piece. And in terms of the pandemic plan, it's never too late. Even now, it's never too late to evolve whatever crisis communication plan you have, take lessons learned to this point and create that plan, but stay agile. We've heard about nimble and responsive and that kind of thing. But if you have a crisis communication plan that you have in place and have practiced and done scenarios, and you're able to stay agile with it, that's really important, because then you can be responsive.
Yep.
And I think it's equally important to also know what roles people might have if a pandemic arises. I think it's good for small companies or larger companies to know, especially if people have different hats or they just have one very narrow focus for their position, to be able to figure out who that core team will be, so that you do take in a couple of different perspectives when you're putting out those different plans and processes to avoid the missteps if you're only narrowly focused on one item.
Yep. It's a really good point. For us to answer that question, not that I'm a panelist, but just to put this out there, for me specifically, it was, how do you balance the human with the corporate? Like, how do you encourage and stuff your own fear down and figure out what the balance is between the lines, and figure out how to communicate that and relate to both your customers internally and externally. And that's just something that we all have to remember as we navigate all of this. Anybody else have anything to add there? All right. So we did get a nuts and bolts question in, and it's a really good question. Guys, we all left the office. We left our phones, we left our computers, our laptop, and well, we took our laptops, but our monitors, and sometimes even business email addresses. Some companies are finding cell phone or home phone numbers difficult to maintain communications. Is it Skype? Is it Teams? Is it whatever platform you're using? How did you guys handle this? How did you guys handle the transition of technology and getting people accustomed to meetings and turning on cameras or not? And then did you use LinkedIn or text or new means to communicate with your customers and suppliers? And you guys, some of you have talked about this already.
Yeah, I'll start and just hit on this again. There was a lot of preparation and training at our trade association. We had trainings on remote working. We had a lot of essential numbers. We have an EP board where you can check in on regularly and provide all your contact information and new phone numbers if it's easier to text or call or FaceTime someone to get a hold of them. Internally, a lot of folks have been using Slack, channels on Slack to communicate lighthearted things or serious things, whatever it might be. Externally, I still think it's largely a conference call world out there. I think people are moving to videos and doing a lot of things on Zoom and different platforms. But I think by and large, especially depending on the industry, you still have a lot of just open conference call lines where people dial in. If given the option to video, I think they might share slides. They might see somebody every once in a while, but even that, I think, in the month 3 of this, the novelty of kind of, hanging out on a video session is enjoyable, but I think it does have limitations, especially in kind of the social space. But I think we were ready, and I don't have any new tips or tricks, but just kind of always planning, kind of going back to the question prior about emergency preparation, having those numbers, having procedures, plans, tools in place that you never know. No one was planning for a pandemic, but emergency planning and just being kind of ready and preparing, was something that we took very seriously and leadership took very seriously. That is a hallmark of the industry as well.
Yeah, Jen, for us, we're a high-tech company. On the commercial side of our business, our guys, we're spread across the country. I work, travel a lot, so we were pretty prepared. Our CEO had instituted, we use Ring Central, which is I think it's a subsidiary of Zoom or something like that, and he actually pretty much wants to see you when we're on those calls. You are on camera when you're on the call, so we're used to it. We're using that a lot more with customers now, and I find that they, at least at this point, our customers have been really, I think they enjoy it. So we haven't run into any issues. I do know we had some times, for example, I worked at home for a while. As I said, I came back to my office, got my extra monitor so I could have 2 at home, picked it up, as did some of our others. But from a communications perspective, even internally, there was, I don't think, a hiccup at all. Externally, maybe a little bit. Chris, our guys are more, I think they're okay with the Zoom type calls, the video now. But they've picked it right up. So we haven't really missed a beat on that front. So for us, it's not been bad. Now, Vancouver's a little bit different. They aren't as home office oriented. So I do think they've had to be more careful about getting technology for folks so they could build a home office. We'll have to look at that going forward. How do we do that better? But on the commercial side of things, it was pretty easy up there. They've also let people back in now, so we're seeing more folks come back in. It's been a little bit tougher up there. We had to buy some new PCs, new laptops, and new monitors, but overall, the commercial side hasn't missed a beat.
Okay.
And I think for us, it was interesting because a lot of our more senior partners have been going into the office for over 40, some 50 years. So for them, all of a sudden, working from home has been a challenge in different ways. So we're fortunate that we have our own service desk that operates 24/7. And so in the beginning, it was a very, very long process you know, the wait times I think were 4 hours to speak with our IT technicians, because they went from having, you know, maybe 100 or so folks that were remote to having to accommodate 1,400 employees all of a sudden. And some of them, you know, including secretaries who are not actually allowed to work remotely. Legally, they weren't before, so they have to clock in and out. How do you manage that with other attorneys who work 24/7 and need access to printers and their litigation binders and court documents and things like that? So it's been, I think, a learning process for everyone. I think, you know, now in month 3, we have a strong handle on what it is that we need to do. But again, it's very different from one practice group to another and from one office to another. So having procedures in place, making sure that you're over communicating. The IT support folks were actually setting up daily meetings on how to train people in one large batch, which was great. But then externally, Zoom originally was having some cybersecurity issues. And so as a firm, we weren't allowed to use Zoom, and it was completely removed from all of our computer databases because there were folks that were dropping in on meetings, and with clients, there's a lot of confidential data that we have. Thankfully, Zoom has switched that and resolved that problem, so now we're able to use Zoom again. But we were using other databases and, again, over-communicating, letting the attorneys know and staff know why we couldn't use Zoom or why we couldn't use the software, and just making sure that we're ahead of the curve and trying to deal with any issues that might arise in that regard.
Yep. So really interesting point, and leads into the next question. Somebody brought up, you know, WeChat and the issues that we've all seen issues with different platforms that have been long standardized in the video market. But this is specifically for you, Chris. On the nuclear side, export control on using software may be an issue. What did you guys do?
I'm sorry, can you say it again, Jen?
Yep, sure. On the nuclear side, export control on using software may be an issue. What did you guys do?
Yeah, sure. So it's an issue that I'm not too familiar with, so I don't want to get out of my lane here. I mean,
Okay. That's fair. We'll take whatever part of the lane you'll give us.
Yeah, we've been communicating internally and externally fine. And, you know, every fleet, every company is doing their own piece of this. You know, the international space is something that I don't have a strong exposure to, so I'll just kind of come back and follow up on that answer if that's okay.
Okay. I will connect you. Okay. Well, I want to thank all of the panelists that have joined us today, provided their insight. I want to thank all of the people that participated, that sent in questions and asked questions. This was really, really good. This was very helpful for me, just to, you know, kind of understand and hear what other people are doing, and how we're keeping the lights on, and how we are reaching across our organizations, no matter the size. And, you know, this has been challenging, and navigating in the new normal has been fun-ish. But it's, you know, it's good when we can all kind of bring our heads together and collaborate and see what value we can offer and receive from all of our colleagues. So thank you guys very much for your participation. Thank you for listening.
Well, it's nice to see all the speakers. I've talked to everybody on the phone, but it's nice to actually see you. So thank you all for being here. I'm Lori Collins, and I am the principal consultant for Collins Climate Consulting, which is my practice. I focus on accelerating the transition to low carbon economy for businesses and communities. So primarily, currently, am an energy policy consultant for the Department of Environment for North Carolina, but there's other projects that I'm involved in around clean energy and working with clean energy entrepreneurs, and some things I do on risk management with investors. So just the overall activities around helping accelerate the low carbon economy. I wanted to mention I'm also a member of the board of E4 Carolinas and have known a lot of the other board members for many years, so I'm happy to be a part of the organization. So today, I think some people were probably on already this morning and some people were coming in new, but just in case there are some folks that are coming in new, I'll just go through the sort of what I call the run of show again. So our focus is adapting and preparing for the COVID-19 recovery. This panel is specifically focused on communicating effectively with team members. But for those of you that were on this morning, you know that the earlier panel, Connecting Effectively with Stakeholders, talked a lot about employees, partly as a major stakeholder, and also just recognizing that in order for vendors and customers to get the care and service that they needed, the employees had to feel good first. So there was quite a bit of discussion already this morning about that, but it'll be really interesting to get additional perspectives this afternoon. So we have 4 panelists, Erin Eisenhower, who is the National Sales Manager with Visit Charlotte, Monica Dozier, who's a partner with Bradley Law, Andy Fusco, who's the VP of Member Services and Corporate Planning with Electricities, and Catherine Butler in Corporate Communications at Duke Energy. So I'm going to turn it over in just a second, starting with Erin Eisenhower. Each speaker will tell a little bit about their organization and then talk about how their organization is working with the various questions around communicating with team members and employees during this time of the pandemic and lots of working from home. And so we'll go through that. Everybody will have about 12 minutes plus a little time to introduce their organizations. Then we'll take questions. So I think that is it. And I'm going to just go ahead and turn it over to Erin.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for having me today. As Lori said, my name is Erin Eisenhower, and I'm a National Sales Manager with the Charlotte Regional Visitors Authority. So for those of you that are unfamiliar with us, we're a North Carolina public authority that was established under the charter for the city of Charlotte. We're funded by local hotel and motel occupancy taxes and a 1% food and beverage tax, plus the revenues that are generated by our venues that we manage. So those public venues consist of the Charlotte Convention Center, the NASCAR Hall of Fame, Bojangles Coliseum, Ovens Auditorium, and the back of house operations at Spectrum Arena. We are also Visit Charlotte, the destination management organization for the region, focusing on meetings and conventions, and that is the arm of the CRVA that I've worked with directly for the last 10 years. And so you may better know the term Convention and Visitors Bureau, which is the same. So we work to bring in meetings that are as small as a group of board of directors up to a large sports or citywide convention. And so last but not least, we also manage the Charlotte Film Commission, helping to bring in movies, television, and commercial productions to the overall region. So at the end of the day, our overall goal is just to advance the visitor economy. An example of what that economy looks like is in 2018, we had 29.2 million visitors to the Charlotte region who spent $7.4 billion while they were here. So it's a very important industry for our region, and the CRVA is behind trying to continue to make that as visible and as robust as possible. So currently we have a total of about 1,192 staff members with about 257 full-time employees. So that means that about 78% of our workforce is part-time, and so they were heavily affected as our venues closed back in March once the guidelines were put in place for large event gatherings. So this will hopefully just give you all a better idea of who we are and what our daily business operations consist of. So communicating with our team members during this time. We operate under a core value model for our organization. And one of those is that we are an employee first culture. So going into this, we knew we wanted to ensure that all of our employees felt as comfortable and prepared as possible, never having been through such a situation. So continual communication and touch points have really been key for us. And so some of those examples would be, we have weekly staff department meetings via Microsoft Teams and Zoom. In other alternate methods, we have one-on-one meetings with our leaders to discuss questions and concerns freely in a different environment. We have weekly email updates from human resources, and they really focus on the importance of mental health awareness and taking care of yourself, in addition to the health and safety guidelines related to the continual updates for COVID. In addition to that, we've also had weekly updates from our CEO, and we've also held an all-hands staff meeting for the entire workforce to update them on everything related to COVID, the health of our overall organization, and potential scenarios for returning to work. So professional development webinars that we've also offered have been regarding resilience and adapting in turbulent times such as these, since we do have so much of our workforce, including myself, that have always been in an office or workspace environment and have never had to work from home. And then in the last part of that for communication, we have also done updates on a daily basis via our intranet and our HR system, so that regardless of what position is held, they all have multiple platforms to be able to engage and get the information that's going on update-wise with the organization. And so with the tools that we used, really the ones that worked best are Zoom and Microsoft Teams, truly. They're the top two tools for communication that have been most effective for us. Teams is really great for having small meetings with colleagues that kind of take the place of inter-office conversations. We liked the informality of the tool and the fact that it was so easy for our staff to use because they were already familiar with it. And, you know, we used to be able to just pop into each other's offices to ask questions and to bounce ideas off of each other. And so we knew we needed to be able to find ways to still communicate and connect with each other. And so Zoom has been the best tool to use because, again, it's so easy to use, but moreover, it's accessible to everyone. And so, again, when we first started working from home, we had to take into consideration that not everyone in our workforce had experience with that, had all of the resources they might need, or knew best practices for communicating while not in the office. So the great thing about Zoom is its overall reliability. You know, we're in storm season, and I can't tell you how many of us have lost power on a regular basis, but all you have to do is dial in and everyone still has access. And so that's very simple, but it's also very powerful. And so, again, we were already using these tools, but right off the bat, we knew that email wouldn't be enough to communicate with our teams. You know, that's really good for distributing black and white information, but we were so used to engaging with each other at such a high level that Zoom was really quickly identified by the majority of our staff as being the tool that would be most effective and accessible. We have multiple generations that work in our entire workforce, and we knew that that was the one that would have the least hurdles for people to be able to get into that normal work from home daily life without having to be too interrupted. So as far as when we started communicating this, early March is when we started to really feel the impacts of COVID on our industry, since we are in the business of events. And once the state of emergency was announced on March 10th, we enacted our work from home plans, and we've been working remotely since. Our venues have, of course, not been in operation due to the restrictions on large event gatherings. However, the Charlotte Convention Center is currently in the midst of a $110 million expansion, and work has not stopped there during all of this. So with that said, we, of course, have staff and construction crews and contractors working on that project, and we had to adapt pretty quickly in early to mid-March with ensuring that those guidelines were being followed as they were being rolled out on a pretty continual basis. And so since March, we've really kind of been going through this constant restructuring of what those safety guidelines look like as things change. And because our venues to operate rely on large gatherings, we have to be really careful about making sure that everyone is as safe as possible. So as far as some of the practices that we put into place, starting with our team members directly, we're going to return to our workspaces in phases, and that's going to depend on the venue that they work in or how their office and workspace is set up. So for example, in the Visit Charlotte offices, we have about 30 people in our office, but it's very small, and so social distancing is almost impossible. So for us, it would make more sense that as long as we are able to continue to do our business practices, that we would continue to work work from home. And then there's less employees that the organization has to worry about on a daily basis in that regard. So we've provided masks and sanitizer to all of our employees, and masks are required to be worn in all public spaces. There will also be multiple workspace cleanings throughout the workday, and we're also hosting several return to work webinars for the workforce so that everyone is as prepared as possible and can get all of their questions answered. We've solicited feedback from our team members throughout this whole process on the way that we're communicating with them, on if it's working for them, and everyone has, because there's been so many outlets that they have been provided to receive information, it's really worked to be able to work with the flexibility of the type of people that we have working with us. And the contractors and suppliers, for example, that we would have coming into the Charlotte Convention Center, in March, we had an infectious disease control expert come in and assess all of our venues and workspaces to make recommendations for ways to improve our health and safety guidelines. And so with that guidance, along with the FDA and the CDC, we have released a Clean with Care fact sheet that outlines the practices of our venues to ensure the safety and wellness of both our team members and guests. And that will continue to change and be updated as the updates change for how we can have public events. And so as soon as we start to have events and larger amounts of guests in venues such as the Charlotte Convention Center, we'll learn more about all of these things and whether or not they make sense in practice or more in theory and what needs to be changed. And so I think, like all of us, we're just having to remain really fluid in this situation and just listen to people and kind of see what those best practices are and what's working and what's not. And that's what the CRVA is doing.
That's great, Erin. Thank you so much. I mean, I love your employee first attitude. And we heard that also this morning, and it also sounds like just a lot of flexibility. There's not a one size fits all, that you're kind of looking at each employee or each venue, like what's the situation as you, as you work to try to figure out what's the best approach. So I think that's a good reminder for all of us. It's not necessarily one size fits all. So thank you for all that you're doing. Is there anything else, or should I move on to Monica?
That's all for me.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Okay, well, Monica, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you. Monica Dozier from Bradley Law.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Monica Dozier. I am a partner at Bradley. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because I am not a professional sales or human resource person. So I will probably be much less articulate about this than Erin. But the interesting thing about a law firm, and we are a law firm based primarily with a footprint in the Southeast, 10 offices, about 550 attorneys, and several thousand employees. So we have some very different challenges in the way that we interact internally, and our firm has taken a number of steps. Let me see if I know how to. There we go. Change the screen. So we have taken a number of steps, very similar to what Erin was outlining from an organizational standpoint. Our offices, generally tend to be smaller offices, but we do not have open office space because the nature of law firm work is confidential. We need to be able to speak freely to our clients without having a lot of people overhear our conversations. So that has benefited us here. Our practices, really are focused in areas that have had interesting, I would say, demand curves throughout the COVID-19 situation. Energy and construction is specifically what I do. I am in the renewable energy group, and my entire practice is focused on utility scale solar renewable development, construction, and operation. So a lot of risk management there with COVID rolling out. We from a law firm perspective, it's an interesting dynamic, and we have to put our clients first and be able to advise our clients appropriately about how they should run their business and how they should, from a legal perspective, make sure that they're protecting their employees and complying with all of the laws and making sure that, each stay-at-home order is appropriately enforced in the workplace. We have a very sophisticated labor and employment team who has done that. But our challenge internally as a law firm is, how do we respond to the new unprecedented challenges of working in, a fully remote world as COVID-19, really impacted the way that we conduct business and the way that we practice law. And so law firms are very different in terms of a business model. As a partner in the law firm, I'm responsible for helping manage the firm, and we have a lot of different committees that are partner-led that make decisions about the firm's direction and how we manage the firm and how we take care of our people. Our first priority, again, was making sure that our clients had what they needed, that we were responsive. We do a significant amount of work in the healthcare sector, and it has been a very trying time for our healthcare professionals, certainly, and making sure that we're helping advise our healthcare clients appropriately, and how they should implement their distribution of PPE, how they restrict visitors, to care centers and all of those things. That was fairly, that's our first instinct as a law firm is what do we do to help our clients? How do we evolve? How do we, make sure that our clients have what they need? So we very quickly did the law firm thing and organized into committees, had committees for various different issues that came up. All of the different legislation, all of the different, remote work issues, labor laws, sending force majeure notices, all of our business clients, especially in my energy world, force majeure has been a topic of conversation ever since COVID has arisen particularly. And so we really developed a team-based approach externally. We have a website devoted to coronavirus. If a client or anyone has a question regarding COVID-19, they can send it to our task force and our team so that it's not one person bottlenecking, the distribution of information. So internally, I think the biggest challenge and one of the things that we have to be honest about as a law firm, our value is in our people. Our value is in our professionals who are able to stay engaged and make sure that we're keeping up with the pace of change and with our clients' business so that we are there for them. You can't do that unless your people are taken care of. And especially from, a mental health perspective, this has been a very trying time, I would say. Lawyers and I will say personally myself, tend to be a very high-strung, anxious personalities. And we have to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves so that we can appropriately, advise our clients. We transitioned to a fully remote workforce, office by office, but firm-wide beginning the week of March 15th. I am based in the Charlotte office. So as Aaron said, as soon as our state of emergency came out, we were already home that week as of about March 9th or 10th. We established an intranet in addition to our client site for internal resources related to COVID-19, had various different, distribution channels for communication. We are organized with a firm managing partner and a board that has been meeting regularly through this time to assess what is working, what is not working, what feedback we have received, from employees. We have an office managing partner in our Charlotte office. Our managing partner has hosted a weekly office get together just from a purely social perspective. And we have had our office human resources professionals have been our main point of contact as to what firm policy is and how we're going to implement this. It has been very interesting from our perspective, how we have, transitioned to a fully remote workforce. We have certain workers who cannot function remotely. Attorneys as professionals, I can generally function, at home. I can log in remotely. I have a firm laptop, but we have court runners. We have administrative assistants. We have receptionists. We have a lot of different employees who need to be cared for during this time. And so our tough question, honestly, from a management standpoint was, what do we do? And so we have been assessing on a continuous basis. This is unprecedented, and we don't know what the changes are going to be. But we made the decision that we would keep everyone employed, and that would be our first, that would be our first priority. One of our core values is people, and that is something that we decided to make a priority, even where we had employees whose job was no longer functional, frankly, because of the shutdowns and because of the remote workforce. So we have never done this. We spent several years before this, and not knowing that this was going to happen clearly, but investing in our IT resources and upgrading our servers, getting all of our attorneys' laptops, which has really, really benefited in this process and made it a fairly seamless transition. We equipped all of our assistants, our administrative staff. We sent them laptops. We sent them all of the IT equipment that they need to put together a home office. And then we have a consolidated help desk, and we have IT professionals in each office who work remotely as a team through all of this to support the transition to a remote workforce. It has been very, very smooth, actually, surprisingly smooth, because we really were not set up for that beyond the pure attorney perspective prior to COVID-19. We have, each employee has gone through, including partners, attorneys, and everyone. We have specific concerns as a law firm. We have to keep our client data confidential. We cannot have unsecure connections. So we benefited from having invested in our IT and being able to get everyone firm-focused equipment. But we also had to conduct cybersecurity training to make sure that client information and documentation has remained secure. So we have done that. We have seen a significant increase in phishing and cybersecurity hacking attempts on our servers and to our personnel during this time. So we have avoided anything happening to date, but we do have an IT team that is organized, on call 24/7 and responsive. So emails that have come out appearing to be from a firm managing partner, but having one slight misspelling of a last name in the email address or something like that. We have had immediate alerts to say, that's not real, delete it, mark it, make sure that you do not respond to it. We have been using, we have not used Zoom as much. We have used Zoom for social calls that do not involve confidential information. And that is because our IT, our technology team advised at the beginning of this that Zoom was not secure enough to meet our clients' cybersecurity and document protection standards. So we have been using WebEx and Skype for business. I believe we are starting to use Microsoft Teams. I have a few clients who are using Microsoft Teams, and that has worked very well. We have asked for feedback at every point here, and lawyers are also generally not shy about giving feedback. So we have received that and incorporated that as we continue to move forward. We have had our human resources professionals have been fantastic, keeping us updated and also sending, correspondence. Every staff member and attorney can send out their work from home animal companions, and we have a little election of who has the cutest dog and that sort of thing, and that's been a lovely morale booster. We also did something I think decently unusual in the law firm world, and different law firms made different decisions about how to engage their summer associates. So every summer we hire law clerks who are law students to come and clerk with us, come and get some law firm experience, and hopefully enjoy working with us so that we can hire them as future attorneys at the firm. Some firms canceled their summer programs entirely. I think a number of them did. Again, our business is people. Our value is in our attorneys and our skilled workforce. We did not want to lose our talent in that we had taken so much time going to law schools, interviewing and recruiting. So we are in week 2 of our fully remote summer program. Right now we have 2 different summer sessions. This is the beginning of the summer, and there's another one at the end of the summer for students who could not make the first window work. Right now we have 91 summer associates across our offices who are fully remote, doing their position remotely, and hopefully getting a little bit of an experience of what it's like to work at Bradley. We sent them all firm laptops as with an in-person summer associate program. We have junior and senior mentors connected with each summer associate to check in and make sure that they are getting the opportunities for the work that they would like to experience. We have had cross-office events, and we are also having office-specific events. Our Charlotte office in particular is famous for meeting in our lunchroom and having conversations that are not about work, and we continue to try to do that virtually during the summer. It's the same people who attend on the virtual session as the in-person session, so that's kind of amusing and fun and good to see everyone. We are having our office trivia night tonight, so our summer associates are going to see our second office trivia night. And later this week, actually, I think we are doing a virtual cooking class where we are having our summer associates attend, and we're all going to try to cook on camera for each other. I suppose we're going to be directed. So that will be very interesting. Anyway, so to say, in short, I think we have had to transition very, very quickly. Everything is changing quickly. We are making real-time decisions, difficult decisions on what to do and how to reopen with 10 offices spread out in very different states with very different laws. Our challenge is really focused on what do we do next? How do we shift back? What's our next step? And we're trying to practice what we preach, putting our people first and making sure, our very talented labor and employment attorneys, have given advice to all of our wonderful clients that we make sure that we manage our firm internally appropriately as well. So we are still in phase 1. I'm based in the Charlotte office, and we are still fully remote, work from home, and will be until phase 2. Phase 2 is a voluntary return to work. We have surveyed our full workforce to say who is comfortable, who is not, how you feel about how work from home has worked for you. Would you like to continue it? If you would not, if you would like to come in, we will have certain protocols, including every day when I open my laptop from home, it says, are you coming into the office? Are you planning to come? Are you in the office now? Are you planning to come into the office today? And if you press yes, then you have to answer a series of questions, confirming that you have not traveled recently, confirming that you are not showing any symptoms of illness. We are having regular deep cleaning of our offices. We have closed our common conference rooms. We are not having client visitors into our offices anymore. Our common lunchroom is closed, and we do have visitor protocol and questionnaires if and when we get to phase 3. We expect to get to phase 2 in North Carolina probably at some point in June, but that really depends on what the state health authorities say. So we are continuing to evolve as a firm, continuing to figure out what works best and what doesn't. We have found that a lot of people really enjoy working from home and they don't mind it. I am personally not one of those people. I will come back into the office as soon as I'm allowed. But we have to make sure that we're doing so safely. One other thing that I think is very important to mention that our firm has emphasized is again, the mental health component of this. Our head of human resources has been very diligent and proactive in reaching out and just sending emails on a weekly basis to check in and to say, it's okay not to be okay, right? With everything that has happened in the world, with all of the changes that we are dealing with, having to balance a fully remote workforce and all of the challenges that come with that from a professional level, but also from an interpersonal level. We have an employee assistance program. It is not monitored by the firm. You are allowed to reach out. Mental health professionals remain on call and have been available virtually. We have also made sure from, a person-to-person standpoint, I check in with my team checks in with me. I have a number of, text chains with colleagues when we have meetings, and they say, well, what do you think about this? And we, figure out who's responding and who's the right person. I think, this has been a very challenging time to keep a professional workplace engaged, motivated, and productive. But, it is really important that we keep our people healthy from a physical and a mental health standpoint. And so as much as we can do to ensure physical health in the workplace, we also are making sure that, we're emphasizing mental health as well. Take a break, make sure that, you're not working too much from home simply because you can. This is going to be a marathon, not a sprint. We expect our phased opening to take probably at least the majority of 2020, if not to flow into 2021. So I will stop there. It's been a different and unique challenge, and this is not my particular area of focus. This is not what I do in my normal professional business. What I'm doing is really focused on renewable energy. So it's been an interesting experience for me to be so deeply involved in our firm policy and management, and understanding that we're all just trying to do the best that we can, and be responsive and helpful in any way that we can through this. And our policy has been from day one, let's put all options on the table. Let's brainstorm what we would do and what will work well. And we will continue to change as that evolves.
Wonderful. Thank you, Monica. So we're going to switch over to Andy next. Andy, if you would like to take over really quickly.
Yes, so I'm Andy Fusco, Vice President of Member Services with Electric Cities of North Carolina. A little bit about who we are. So, if you're familiar with the electric utility industry, you probably know there are three, more or less major types of utilities. Large IOUs like Duke, rural electric cooperatives, and municipally run electric utilities, and I represent the municipally run electric utilities, or we call them public power. Electric Cities is really a membership organization, even though we operate a lot like a utility. We have 86 municipal members across the three states that you see here. And within the state, we provide wholesale power to 51 cities. So really our mission is twofold. We provide wholesale power, and we also provide a suite of services, and the services side is more or less what I'm responsible for. So my part of the organization handles, a wide variety of services, and I put these up here more for, the benefit of the discussion, because I have a variety of services, and with regard to COVID-19, they've each kind of required a different level of response, depending on the type of service. So I have a number of my staff who works in our headquarters in Raleigh, look a lot like office workers, and I'll address that. But then I'd say the other significant portion of my staff works out in the field. We run the distribution utilities for 4 of our members. So we run line crews there. We run a safety and training operation. And what that involves is going out in the field, auditing crews, performing training for line workers. And if you're familiar with that, it's more in the field training than classroom training. So that again required special consideration with regard to COVID. We do a number of customer facing sorts of activities. We have a key account program that serves large commercial and industrial customers. So we'll do various levels of energy audits and other services for those type of customers. And then we have a residential energy program where we provide a host of services, including in-home energy audits there. So, as you can kind of imagine, we're kind of dealing with a bunch of different situations, and it's caused a lot of thought and unique solutions in each case. I guess where I'll start in terms of our responses, I just put a little bit of a timeline up here so you can see how electric cities responded relative to the larger statewide orders and requirements. So in early March, I think all of us saw that COVID-19 was coming down the pike. On March 9th, we issued a corporate-wide no travel policy, so you couldn't, if you were an employee, couldn't travel via public modes of transportation or do overnight hotel stays. And the very next day, the governor declared a state of emergency, and he also issued a couple of other orders, more or less shutting the state down, in response to the crisis. We more or less remained in that state until mid-May. I will kind of elaborate a little later on what we did with our line crews because there was a level of activity there. But, kind of emerging out of this on May 20th, the governor issued Order 141. And, as the governor did that, we started easing our restrictions as well. We did plan to open our Raleigh office to a limited number of employees on June 1st. We had to push that to June 8th, and I'll get to that in a minute. And again, though, that was a very limited opening when we did that earlier this week. And we're, probably going to look to July 1st to see, what our next steps would be with regard to opening up the office to employees and easing further restrictions. So, I'm not an HR person, but I have a relatively large number of employees, so I can at least talk about how the approach that I took, and I'll touch on some of the approaches of the company. First off, we have an excellent IT staff. They've supported us. They've had to support remote communications for a long time. Sometimes, though, it's better to be lucky than good, and I say that because in February, we decided to transfer over our corporate telephone system to Ring Central. Okay, timing is everything. And so, to the uneducated, that means changing the phone on your desk. But I guess if you're an IT person, there's a lot more to that. And it was really an entire system changeover. And what came with that was a video teleconferencing capability, and it replaced our old teleconferencing capability. So the week of March 1st, IT, trained the employees, and that was just the scheduled training. It had nothing to do with the virus on the teleconferencing capability. And of course, about half the employees hit that and the other half didn't. And then, the following week we were shut down. So we were wondering how that went, and it went really well, actually. The application was very intuitive, and it was almost like we'd been using the application, several months prior. We didn't miss a beat, and that from day one with COVID was our main form of communication, was the video teleconference. It's got the same look and feel as Zoom or Microsoft Teams, and it's worked great. Talk a little bit about frequency of communication. Corporate-wide, our CEO talks with the employees once a week. He's done that since the beginning. Within my division, I was, before the virus, I was meeting in person once every other week because we're all in the office. However, once we couldn't go to the office, I changed that for my division, and I moved to having direct report meetings every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and all employee division meetings every Tuesday, Thursday. And I did that, just to help people feel engaged from day one. We did that, for several weeks, and I began to ask, hey, is this too much? Do you want to back off a little bit? Is this over communication? And the employees really loved it because they really don't have any other interaction during the daytime. So to this day, I'm meeting with my employees on some form every day. Unless there's a big meeting or I have a conflict, or most of us won't be able to attend, and we'll just not hold it. But those can be as short as 15 minutes, or they can be an hour. I try to, push down information that I hear that employees would want to hear about, coming back to the office. We coordinate work activity, and we also look at our our schedules for the upcoming week or two. With regard to the Raleigh office, again, currently we have very limited access. Of our 150 employees, I'd say only 20 people are really going to the office right now. And those are folks who have something in the office that they need to access, like the mail, like a particular piece of computer equipment that can only be accessed there, our accounts payable type folks, that sort of thing. So those are the only folks who are going to the office now. And much like Monica said, there are, a lot of restrictions. We've got the face masks and even if you're there, you can't have a face-to-face meeting in a conference room. You got to do a teleconference in your office. We are not taking temperatures due to HIPAA concerns, but we are asking employees to, sign off on a policy whereby they'll continue to monitor their health and not come in if there's any question. Field operations has been very interesting. As I said, we run distribution systems for 4 cities. So on day one, we, I don't know if sequestering is the right word, but we required all of our line workers to work from home. So we basically sent them home with their truck. We initially shut down, all non-essential work activities. So if it was a capital project or something, we held it, until a later date, trying to, keep our crews healthy so they wouldn't get sick in the event that we had an outage and we had to restore power. So it was only critical sorts of incidents where we would send them into the field. And early on, we would only have them interact with a 3 or 4 person crew and send one guy to the equipment yard to get whatever they need. We've since eased that. They can, go to the office, but we're not having large congregations at the central offices. So that was kind of one of the first things we've eased. Our field services, we are beginning to send our key accounts guys into industrial facilities because, general industrial facilities have good measures in place for anybody entering there. So we've had a few requests for industrial audits. We are restarting our safety schools at Nash Community College next week. So we'll have people there on site, going through our lineman safety schools. This has also caused us to revisit how we communicate with our members. We would have, maybe quarterly face-to-face meetings on various topics with certain subsets of our members. The communications become much more frequent. Early on in the crisis, we were meeting with about 4 or 5 groups on a weekly basis, like customer service reps, finance directors, utility directors. As we've gotten, things under control, we're spreading that out. But I think as a practice, we're going to really move to maybe a monthly webinar series for each of these concentrated groups to allow them to share ideas and also to pass along information and collaborate. I want to point out some challenges through this. This has been, aside from just the virus, this has been, I think, a very unique year for everybody. Unfortunately for us, it started in February. We lost our VP of communications and, had not replaced her before the crisis. So going into this crisis where communications with our members and our stakeholders was, crucial, we unfortunately did not have that position filled. So we've had to deal with that and work through the issues. Employees managing family issues is something I think everybody, is having to kind of understand in a work from home situation, dealing with moms and dads who, have to have their kids go to virtual school and all that. So the workday has changed dramatically. It's no longer just, 8 to 5 or whatever. We've got people waking up early in the morning, working, and then, taking time off in the middle of the day to help their kids and then working late into the night. So the work hours have definitely changed, one thing we've noticed. I run our mutual aid program. We had a very early tropical storm brush our coast, so we had to enact that through all of this. Fortunately, there was no real damage, so it was kind of a non-event, but it was very unexpected. Accidents are rare in our industry, but unfortunately we had an accident during the COVID crisis, and I had to dispatch my safety group to that site. The last time we had an accident was 3 years ago. So just another rare fluky occurrence. For municipals, executive orders 124 and 142 are very significant. If you're not familiar with those are the orders where the governor has, directed municipalities, not just for electric, but for every utility they serve, to not shut customers off. And that's become a very significant cash flow issue for our cities if they can't cut off bad accounts. And we are seeing a dramatic rise in non-payments through the crisis. And I mentioned the riots there as I said earlier, we delayed our office opening from the 1st to the 8th, and that was because of the riots in Raleigh. We had so few people plan to go to the office anyway, we didn't want to risk anything whatsoever, so we just pushed things off a week.
Thank you, Andy. We're going to go right into Catherine Butler next.
Hey there. So I'm the last of the four, so I'm sure some of the things that I will talk about will sound somewhat similar, but I will try to provide some fresh perspective as well. So for those that I haven't met before, I'm Catherine Butler. I am part of our corporate communications team at Duke Energy. I've been with the company about 7 years. I'm sure most of you are very familiar with Duke, but in case for some reason you are not, we are one of the largest regulated utilities in the nation as well as across the world. So we've operated for more than a century in the Carolinas. We have more than 25 million customers. Those range from gas as well as electric. We often talk about our meters, so that's more of the 7.6 that you'll hear about from the electric side, but we like to talk about the actual customers because there's multiple people within the home who are relying on us. So it has been a fascinating experience to oversee the communications for the pandemic response. Prior to my current role, I actually was overseeing communications for our coal ash work. So I think they just have decided that I'm going to be in our crisis center forever. So it's been interesting. There definitely are things that Duke Energy has done very, very well. I think there are things that we have learned along the way, both from a communications and an operational perspective. So I'll give you some insights about those. But I think fundamentally, similar to Andy, we're used to crisis. We operate where we have to respond to storms. We have to be prepared for the potential for a nuclear disaster. We have to prepare for what if something happens to the grid. Unfortunately, we are fairly used to protests, maybe not to the degree that we're seeing necessarily across the nation right now, but we do have people who protest against Duke Energy. So we're used to that crisis response. What we have found, though, and one of the things that I think has been most challenging is to have all of the states in which you operate and all of the business units that you have in a company impacted at the exact same moment. And that is something that I think any business right now can attest to. But typically when we are responding to a storm or maybe a nuclear incident or something related to coal ash, it's more targeted. Whether that's one state or one business unit or one group of employees or maybe one group of stakeholders. And it's just a very different dynamic right now. And so what we have really focused on, I would say, are four groups, four big audiences. And it's been kind of a fourfold approach from a communications perspective. So that's employees, customers, communities, and operations. So as we think about that, obviously most of our time today has been spent on employees, but I will say that there have been other big focal points for us as well, particularly our customers, because as Andy mentioned, there are a lot of folks who cannot pay their bill right now. And so we're trying to make sure that our customers realize that we understand the situation they're in. And we're also trying to arm our employees to be able to respond to questions from their neighbors or family members who may not be able to make that payment right now. So when I think about employees, our objective throughout our response has been to protect the health and safety of our teammates. That has been the forefront of everything. Duke is really our number one value is safety. If you have talked with anyone at Duke, if you've ever come to a meeting at Duke, we start all of our meetings with safety moments. And so I think that has actually been a huge benefit for us because people are so focused on safety within the company that this is yet another layer on top of how we communicate about safety. So whether that's process driven for our operational teams that aren't necessarily able to work remotely, or those who may be transitioning back to the workplace, the fact that safety has been part of our culture for so long does provide a benefit when we roll out a new process. So they're more used to this safety culture or active caring where you say, hey, can you put your mask on? Or can you step away from me a little bit? You know, we're close together. That's something that we're used to. It's still uncomfortable, but because we're already in that mentality, it does help us a bit as we think about what's next. So let me talk a little bit about, I'll give you kind of a history of what we've done so far and then what's ahead for us. And I will, again, I'm going to try to keep this fairly brief because I know a lot of people have talked about some of the things that I'll mention or that Duke has done as well. But we have a pandemic advisory council at the company. We have for many years. And so in January, when we started to see the virus pop up in multiple countries, you know, you just started to see more angst about coronavirus. We actually activated our pandemic advisory council. So this was long before the state orders started to come out across the states in which we operate. And that team started reviewing all of our business continuity plans. And we also went ahead in February and started communicating about personal hygiene because we started to see the fact that some of our employees could be traveling places, maybe they're planning a spring break trip, whatever it was. And so we just realized, let's go ahead, we'll just get a few things out there or we'll link to a couple news pieces or tips. So when the March timeframe came around, it wasn't like our employees hadn't really heard about it, which was good because I think that built a lot of trust and credibility for our communications approach. And so around March, I can't remember the exact date, March 6th, around that time frame, we activated our Joint Information Center, realizing that this was going to have a lot of impacts across multiple jurisdictions and multiple business units. And similar to the others, we realized the need to transfer the majority of our workforce to remote operations. So for us, we have about 45,000 people. About 30,000 of those are employees with 15,000 contractors. And in a single day, we switched over 11,000 people to remote operations. And within a week, we had 18,000 signing in remotely. So I will say our CIO and I were best friends during that time. We had each other on speed dial. I about had a heart attack when we said, here we go. And that was the first time in our company's history that we've ever switched that many people to a remote operation, let alone that number was just something that we never thought we would do. So what we did benefit from was the fact that Ally Bank had actually done this a couple days before us. And our CIO and our IT team spent a lot of time talking with the technology team at Ally and some other companies in the area to say, what are some lessons learned? And one of the big benefits we had was learning ahead of time to have a texting system in place for all of our employees. So if the IT system went down or they started to see slowness on the system, we could easily send them a text so that there was less frustration and there were less calls into our call center because then you just overwhelm the phone system as well. So day one was one of the only times we've had to send a text. We've had one or two other IT issues, really weren't Duke issues. They were larger scale Google kind of issues. But we've been able to use that, which has provided a really good platform for us to quickly communicate and also tell people don't call the helpline. We already know the same way we text with customers and say, don't call, we know there's an outage, it's okay. So we're actually using the same tools internally. So that's one thing that I would mention that was really helpful when we shifted to remote operations. But the other thing that we really focus on as a communications team after we got through what I would consider the all hands on deck push approach was a consistent calendar of communications where our teammates could expect to hear from different people or about different topics on specific days. We found that our teammates were very, very hungry for information. They were very nervous. And so at this point, typically, similar to Andy, on Mondays, we send out a video from our CEO. We've been filming those from her house. They are very casual. And for those of you that have, interacted with Duke or seen Lynn talk, she is a more formal individual. And so it's been a really good experience for our employees to see her in a little bit of a informal setting where it's an iPhone video. She's coming to them from her home. And so it provides an opportunity for them to ask questions that I think they otherwise maybe wouldn't be as comfortable asking, because she's also demonstrating a sense of empathy and talking about some of the hardships that, she's having to adjust, and what it's like to be on a Teams meeting with her direct reports when most of them hadn't necessarily used Teams before. So that's been a really positive communications tool for us. We've also launched on Tuesdays and Thursdays manager communications, and we don't use them unless we have something to say. We're not just going to go out there and put something there, but people know that if there's something that needs to be said to a manager to provide them with more guidance or a preview of something that's going to go to all employees, we have that on Tuesdays and Thursdays. On Wednesdays, we have kind of the 5 big things you should know this week, or 5 things you may have missed. And then Friday, that's usually a day that we try to avoid all employee communications unless needed. We do have operations teams that don't necessarily work on Fridays as frequently, and just in general, to what everyone else is saying, our teammates are also inundated with trying to, manage a house while also trying to work. And so if we can have one day where they're maybe not getting as much from us, that's a good thing too. So the consistent calendar has also been very helpful. We also launched virtual open forums or town halls with our CEO. We've had about 3 or 4 of those, and we've launched a couple podcasts with particularly around the HR issues. And what we have found is that a lot of the questions center around things like transition from remote work back to the workplace, or are we concerned about layoffs? It's very me-centric. And so as we look at how we move forward, we launched a survey in April, and we're launching another one in June. And in April, we just left the survey open. It was not something where people had to do it by a certain date. We did a rolling feedback. We would provide it to our C-suite members and other leadership team members. And we really tried to focus in on some of the themes that we were hearing. And that's helped us as we've looked at what's next and how we start to check and adjust our communications. So a few things that have evolved, we had some policies in place to help our teammates. So things like we provided stipends to certain teammates under a specific compensation threshold, because we realized that they had a lot of dependent care needs that maybe they weren't expecting. We also extended or allowed for more dependent care, paid dependent care time off. But through the survey, we learned that people needed possibly even more as we look at summer and the fact that a lot of camps are closed and other things. So it's been a really good means of two-way communications, not just to develop our comms approach, but also our HR policy approach and where our employees are really needing relief right now. So as we look ahead, I'll touch on just a few quick things. We are really focused on the transition from remote work. As others have mentioned, it's a gradual phase process for us. We had intended to have a very small group back on June 1st. We shifted that to June 15th due to the unrest in our communities in which we operate, and just felt like it was probably a better time for our employees to stay at home, be with their family members, and then try to shift back when it was a little bit safer for them as they were maybe working night shifts specifically. And as we transition some teammates back, we are also sending them re-entry kits. The first phase is getting those kits. They are getting them to their homes, and they include face coverings, face masks, a personal hand sanitizer, a bag in which you can put your mask in, and then a lot of guidance, because there's a lot of information out there. And while we have an internal portal system for people to search for information, if it's coming to their home, it's a little bit more, hey, this is my kit. This is the last thing that I would say, the fear that we are hearing from employees. That's why we decided to do the virtual tours of the facilities. They want to know what it looks like. And we're also going to do testimonials from teammates who've gone in and feel they maybe were fearful, they feel more comfortable, or things that they still just are kind of unsure about, and just kind of providing that really transparent view. So those are a couple things. As Andy mentioned, storm season is another one, our operational aspect, as well as thinking about lessons learned and what our workforce and workplace strategy looks like long-term. So we're getting a lot of questions about that, both from our employees and externally. What does this mean for the Charlotte Metro Tower that you're building? What does it mean for the workplaces where we were already, what I like to call, we were densifying, and now we're de-densifying and trying to move people further apart? What does that mean long-term? We have some people who want to work remotely forever. We have other people who are saying, this is awful. I just want to be back in my office, and why aren't you letting me come in? So we're trying to look at all of those lessons learned as we develop our long-term strategy. But definitely, I do think it will be a different dynamic as we look at our Charlotte Metro Tower. The construction continues, but I think the work spaces may be a bit different than what we originally intended. So with that, you know, David, I know others talked about quite a few themes that I probably would have touched on, but I think overall, I would be remiss to say that, I mean, this isn't easy. I don't think anyone on this phone call would sit here and say that this has been an easy time for anybody, whether it's the pandemic or the current national events going on, and how you manage communications with employees and help leaders also communicate, which has been another big piece of it, is coaching leaders while you're not with them and helping them understand what they need to say. But I do think I'm really proud of what Duke's done. I'm also, you know, looking at some of the other things people have done. I've been taking little notes, but I think it's a really important time for us to be open to benchmarking and sharing lessons learned, because it's uncharted territory for everyone.
So thank you, Catherine. Really fascinating conversation, shared thoughts from all four of our panelists, Andy, Monica, Aaron, and Catherine. You know, as I listen, and you know, throughout my career, I've run very, very large organizations, thousands of people, and small, and you know, I've always had the philosophy, and all four of you have said this, that you know, the people are our most valuable asset, and our business starts with that. And I'm sitting here thinking, you know, as you've been dealing with these issues the past nearly 3 months now, what are your thoughts with regard to hiring as we move through the next couple of months, with regard to employee retention? I mean, you know, not that you have plans, but how in the world do you even begin to think about things like that? Andy, Monica, Aaron, Catherine, if you unmic and share with us, how does your organization begin to approach this?
Happy to touch on it a little bit. You know, at this point, Duke has taken a number of steps to avoid the need for layoffs of our current employees. So I would say we're not really in a place where we are hiring. We're really trying to preserve current jobs. But I do think, you know, we did hire people right before the pandemic, and they all had to start remotely. And that's just something that I think our HR team has had to think a lot about, and help our leaders who have those employees prepare for what an onboarding experience is like when you're remote. So I think that's kind of where we are right now. I think long term, we'll see. Obviously, you know, we won't be in a hiring freeze forever, but right now that's where we are. And I think a lot of companies are feeling that right now from just the economic conditions.
Andy?
We're a little different. We're a lot smaller. And it just so happened, my particular part of the organization had a significant number of job openings going into COVID. And we hired, we filled 3 of those positions virtually. It was such that we kind of knew the candidates from others beforehand. But, going into the summer, we're continuing to recruit to fill our positions. They're vacancies, they're not new positions. It's interesting with our office policy. I'm not sure I can bring the candidates in for a face-to-face meeting, and I know some folks, like to have face-to-face meetings with a job candidate. So we're looking at meeting at cafes and outdoor eating venues or whatever to kind of meet that need.
Yeah. Aaron, Monica, any thoughts? Monica, you shared a lot with regard to your summer internship program. How about regular attorneys?
Yeah, we have been, I think this is very unique. One of the things that our firm, again, with a very people first culture, which sometimes is maybe not, how do I say that nicely, is maybe not the predominant law firm culture, but our firm is particularly people first and people oriented. We were proud in 2008, we did not lay anyone off during the recession. So we tend to take a more conservative approach to our hiring so that we don't have to make difficult decisions in hard times. We've done a number of things. I think we have required our attorneys and our staff as well to account for time daily to make sure that everyone is utilized, everyone is busy, see how work is coming in and see what the demand is. Try to consolidate to understand what the industry trends are from our clients, what type of support they need so that we can move and be there with them and provide that. We have been looking at, from a financial perspective, frankly, we're looking at, receivables and everything that, law firms need to continue operating on our budgets. I would say that we have scaled back our budget in 2020, mainly because we do a lot of external, community events that have been postponed or canceled, not really from an employee standpoint, but, you're no longer having the things that law firms support, which are the community, community banquets and fundraisers and, we're certainly continuing to donate to our causes. We have a foundation that donates to charitable causes on a strategic level, but we are not hosting events for Center for Children's Advocacy, for example, that we would normally pay to host, right? And so I think from a hiring perspective, we are fortunate. We remain busy. We've been very conservative, financially, and it looks like things are stable right now. This is an ongoing, we want to preserve our people and our jobs. It's an ongoing challenge. And, unlike kind of a recession in 2008, we really don't know what the long-term impacts of this are going to be. And it's got to be a, continual assessment of how things are going and what we can do to make sure that we're taking care of our people. I think that the predominance in a law firm world, we have hired some consultants to tell us what the economic outlook looks like. Our firm's managing board serves on various different industry committees where different managers of law firms get together and say, here's what we're seeing in the market, here's what we're seeing, to get some kind of intelligence that can help us understand where we need to move from a professional services standpoint. And, we expect there's going to be some slowdown. We expect this is going to be a pretty long recovery. We expect that there are going to be certain industries and certain, clients who are not going to be able to, continue, at the rate that they have been. But I do think it is something of a relief. I will say 3 months into this, it was much more terrifying at the beginning to say, oh my gosh, everything is going to go away and fall out. And it's been very consistent from our standpoint. People still want to work. People are still very engaged. I think the practice of law is going to be very different moving forward. From a people standpoint, and certainly for all of us in the business world, it's always been our priority. Go to your clients, meet with them, sit down with them, understand them and their business. And that's not happening anymore, right? There are no site visits. There are no working from clients' offices. There are no really getting out and doing seminars where you're interacting with people. We're in this virtual forum, and what does that mean for the future? I don't know. I'm happy that we've been able to transition remotely so successfully, but we're still taking it day by day. We still anticipate. I think one of my summer associates was on the first hour of this and had to leave to go to a firm. But we do still anticipate having a need, and we only hire our summer associates. We structure our classes in classes. The Charlotte office, we have 5 summer associates in our Charlotte office this summer. Again, 91 across the firm. But we do anticipate being in a position of being able to make them offers. That is our goal. That's staggered 1 to 2 years out according to their law school graduation date, what date they would take the bar exam. Some of them go to clerkships, but our long-term outlook, we're still fairly positive, I think.
So Erin, how about any thoughts with regard to your organization's
I would
employment pension? Yeah.
Yeah, similar to Andy, we are on the smaller side, and with so much of our workforce being part-time and our venues being closed since early March, they are definitely the part of our workforce that has been impacted the most severely. And so the hope would be that as soon as guidelines allow for us to be able to open those venues, which is kind of changing and we're just having to be fluid with it, that we would be able to bring all of those employees back. And before all of this, because of our company already being on the smaller side, we weren't one of those companies that always really had positions available. And when we did, they were more part-time reliant because of the fact that we are so venue and event heavy. So I think that it would most likely stay the same, but so much of that is going to have to do with the next couple of months. And if our phases stick to the dates that we think that they will stick with, and the ability to open those back up gradually will affect that part of the workforce. And I think how quickly we'll be able to get that back to the health that it was at before.
Thank you, Erin. So throughout the day, we've heard a good deal about how we start with our employees, and we really have, there's been some heroic stories about how we've communicated and embraced the employees and taken care of them, and then also our customers. We've listened to our customers, and we start with our employees. That's the foundation of business. The customers, I've always said, are the only ones that send us money, so they're very important in our lives. But there's another, we're part of a chain, and there's another part of the chain, and I'm curious, particularly with regard to Electricities and Duke Energy, how did you think about your suppliers and engaging them in this process, and whether it was as robust and full as your communication with customers and with employees? So Andy, Catherine, even Monica and Erin, can you tell us a little bit about how you look down the chain as opposed to up the chain?
I guess I'll start. Well, one of our suppliers is Duke. And, they have us on speed dial and we have them on speed dial. You don't have to go to the office to maintain those communications now. And that's, at the contractual level. Through this, though, we do operate a trading desk, and we were able to manage that remotely, which was, a technical challenge that we overcame. So those two on the day-to-day operations from a power supply, that was, probably the biggest thing, kind of getting to your point there, David. Other suppliers of equipment, they are very flexible to begin, at least the ones I deal with, distributors, sellers of equipment or what have you. They are very flexible to begin with. And, I've always had, good relations with them where they can contact me via the means that we've always had. It's just kind of the nature of the business. So I'd say it was pretty seamless. I mean, a couple technical challenges to overcome, but not bad at all.
So from the Duke you know, as I think about supply chain, we tried to leverage the relationships that we'd already built, similar to Andy. But I do think, you know, we had separate communications that we would send out to suppliers and vendors. We would try to do them around the same day that we were sending a big policy change to employees or customers, making sure that they were aware of the same kinds of protocols that we were putting in place. You know, I think the biggest thing, a lot of our suppliers, if they were doing work with Duke, we had certain safety, health and safety protocols in place. And so them to adhere to the same things, especially if they were going to be on our property. So in the midst of this, we had three big nuclear plant outages, and huge. I mean, we bring an additional 1,000 people just to that site. So if you think about your workforce in some of these organizations, like your entire workforce is just coming for a month or two just to do a plant outage for us. So we had to get all of those people up to speed on what they were going to see, whether that's temperature checks or masks or social distancing and what that looks like. You know, I think the biggest thing that we saw is actually we had more leverage getting some of the PPE or personal protective equipment that we needed. And some of our suppliers or vendors didn't necessarily have that pool in the industry. And so we were almost trying to get an additional X number of masks to provide those to suppliers. So it was kind of this mutual, like we were just trying to work together. But I think the PPE thing was a really big issue. And it still is, you know, there's still some shortages here and there, but I think trying to work together, trying to provide very transparent communications with them. And our head of supply chain has been on the phone nonstop, just trying to keep people up to date. So that's where I would leave it for the time being.
Yeah, Catherine, the thought of bringing 1,000 people onto your site with new safety protocol must just have been daunting.
It was, when we put the temperature screening in place, we did that in a single day at a nuclear facility. And so we had to communicate that out to, it was about 2,500 people. And it was a lot, you know, it took a long time. It was like a drive-through temperature screening. And you had to prepare people for, you're going to be in line for a little while. And that's just part of this. So there are operational things on the back end that I think a lot of people don't think about when it comes to a critical infrastructure company, whether that's a utility or a hospital, whatever it is. There are things that are happening behind the scenes that are definitely require our suppliers to adhere to the standards in which we're outlining for our employees as well.
One additional thing, David, that came to mind when Catherine was talking was the way we manage our crews. You know, especially in a situation where you might have to restore an outage. And in the past, right, I mean, for public power, if the hurricane hit the coast, then the cities in the west would send their crews to help out the guys on the coast, and vice versa, the ice storm in the west. Not so much the case with COVID, because the guys, in Lumberton, for example, really don't want to send their crew to Charlotte where all the cases of COVID was. So, we had a kind of a change of strategy where we started signing up a lot of contractors in the event that we had an outage or worse yet, had a city with crews that got infected, because our other cities didn't want to send their crews there.
Yeah, well, and fortunately, Andy and Catherine, I think, the unplanned outages of grid and that have been relatively light due to us not having very much severe weather. So we've been blessed there. So Monica, Aaron, did you want to comment on, I see Monica's got open mic.
I'll be happy to comment. From a law firm perspective, we have a number of vendors. We have engaged probably less, obviously, than Duke and everyone else, right? So we've been more helping our clients understand what they need to do and how to protect, particularly their job sites. I mean, most of my clients have continued working through this, and there have been impacts from social distancing, but what do we do and how do we manage that, and how do we flow that down through the chain? Our internal vendors, we have really adapted We have been having virtual and remote hearings, mediations, arbitrations. Very, very interesting. I had a Zoom mediation last month, which I was very skeptical of, but was effectively managed by the mediator. I think that takes a different level to a mediation in terms of a challenge of how to manage people remotely. And, you know, another thing that we did, we have a court runner and copy service that we routinely use for legal filings and things like that. And the courthouse is closed except for certain essential and criminal matters. Civil matters have mostly been suspended and postponed. And we do not do criminal work. We only do civil work. But we have kept our vendor engaged because as we have sent our essential administrative staff to also work remote along with the rest of the firm, we have had our vendor on socially distanced protocols manage our mail, our FedExes, our notary services, having that scanned in every day and saying this is okay to send to recycling, this is okay, this needs to be saved, this is an original document, how we get those documents to our clients and how we manage those things has been an evolving challenge. And I think that the state actually, North Carolina particularly, is allowing remote notarization, which has been an interesting shift in the legal world that I don't know if that will be permanent or temporary, but that's very interesting. I on a personal note, had to close a mortgage refinance a couple of months ago, and we decided to go through with it. But closing, we still needed the notary and everything, and so we're standing out apart, socially distanced and we've managed to kind of bridge that gap remotely. But it'll be an interesting, we think, permanent shift in how people think about official original documents, electronic signatures, electronic notarization, how you verify that, both from a legal perspective and from a security and confidentiality perspective. We're really looking at where the world is going because we have to be able to adapt to that.
Okay, so we're coming up on that. I'm going to pose a two-part question to all of our panelists to wrap up, and then we'll make just a few closing comments. And the question is this: we've heard of the heroic efforts to change, and the change was quick and dramatic, and we really moved into areas of work activity and processes that some of us had never been engaged in before, and we had to pioneer new practices, new ways of interacting with each other. So I'm curious as to what sticks. Have you undertaken new things out of necessity and found that in fact it's really a good practice and we're going to keep it? And then my question with that is, do you believe that we ever go back to the normal of, say, January 2020? So what sticks, and do we gravitate eventually back to a normal? I'm just going to let the four of you have at it.
I'll kind of start with that because our industry is still very much at a standstill, whereas it sounds like most of you are still able to get some business done. And so, with hotels and restaurants still being having their hands tied with what they're able to do, and that being such a large function of what our entire organization focuses on, we are still in that process, I think, of figuring out what is going to be permanent for us, because we don't really know how the hotels' lives will be forever changed. We don't know how the restaurants are going to be. We were just talking last week about how before all this happened, every industry was talking about sustainability and what can we do to do our part to save the world. And now we're having to go back to all of these single-use products and using all this plastic and paper that we were trying to get away from, because now it's a health and safety issue. And so I think that we're going to have to go back to some old-fashioned things, or things that we wanted to maybe get away from for the next few months, if not more than that. And the meetings industry is still so up in the air with you know, they already wanted to encourage that people be more creative in the way that they hold meetings, because we all have to go to meetings and they can be very boring, they can be very monotone and not very interactive. And so regardless of what industry you're in, you go to a meeting. And so the industry itself was already trying to find new ways to invent itself. And now it's going to have to kind of start that all over again as we figure out what physical events will look like once we can all get together. So I think as far as practices for our organization, one thing that we have really learned is that there's no such thing as over communication. We have provided so many ways for people to get information that regardless of how they want to get it, they have access to that. And it really helps in an environment where people are just, as we all are, going through something that most likely they never have before. And so these are really uncharted waters for us. And I think that's kind of probably the biggest things that we're focusing on for the next probably 6 months to a year.
So other thoughts from anyone? What sticks? Do we get back to normal?
I think from the biggest thing for us is that we're in the middle of digital transformation. We've been trying to push people toward using more digital capabilities. And I think that this ripped the Band-Aid off for a lot of people who didn't want to do that, because they were forced to use digital platforms like Teams or other collaborative tools. So I think that is one thing that has changed that I think will stick. I do think, the question about longer term remote operations for more corporate centers, whether that's Duke or not, is one that I think people will grapple with. We were really seeing this trend of people companies had really started to shift to remote operations, and then most recently in the past 2 years have started to bring them back in because they saw a lack of productivity. And I think as much as we are seeing people are still working, people are being productive, those who are at home, of course, we have a number of folks in the operations areas that can't be remote. But I do think the strain of managing your home life while you're also managing your work life with kind of society's in a weird spot right now. So maybe if we weren't in this place where children are at home and it was all remote operations, we'd see something different. But I have a feeling that, in 2 years, a year and a half, 2 years, we will still see the value of those in-person meetings and in-person collaborative environments, particularly like Optimist Hall that we just built, that still generate a lot of value. And so I don't see us doing a full rip the Band-Aid off and going to remote operations. I see us looking for opportunities to, maybe look at different positions that could be remote. But I do think in general, people will come back to the workplace and have a greater appreciation for the digital tools that we have available, as well as our customers, because that's really how they're getting all of their information right now.
Catherine, I agree. It is sad to think of Optimus Hall, Duke Energy's Technology Innovation Center, being empty. That is a sad thought.
It is sad, but I will say the innovation has extended beyond those walls. So it's been really cool to watch the teams continue important projects for the customers, despite not being in the space.
Yep. So, Monica, Andy, any closing thoughts on what sticks?
Since I wasn't muted, I'll go. Catherine actually brought up some great examples, and just kind of reiterating that I've had the good fortune to work in several industries through my career, and having landed in the utility industry, it's the most conservative industry I've ever been in. Okay, and so when you talk about having to make this transformation overnight as a reaction to an external COVID, it's I think forced at least my industry to accept the fact that we can be flexible. Change is good, we by just force of where we were in that point in time, we couldn't afford to overanalyze anything. We had to take steps and take risks, and I think that's a good thing for the industry. And I'll just point to the fact that our employees have more dynamic skill sets, I think, today than ever before. I point obviously to technology and also to kind of some of the outside influences. So I think that is kind of a silver lining to this, I think, for the industry and my company, and hopefully we'll take kind of a different approach. And yeah, the pendulum will swing back. I don't think it will swing back all the way. I think this will help us, become more progressive and in dealing with these changes.
Monica?
So I think some things will change permanently as a result of this. I do think there is I do think people want the in-person interaction and the community. I think it is going to take a long time to get back there, and what it looks like when we get there may be a little different. I don't know from the law firm and the legal practice world. I will say this was not possible when I began working remotely 10 years ago. I had a number of years in my career where I was I was out of the office. I was travel 80%, and I could not work off of our firm system. I was not able to log in remotely. I did not have reliable Wi-Fi access. With a little Verizon bubble, which I still have at a remote job site somewhere in, the Southwest or internationally, or, wherever my practice took me. All of that has really, it's incredible to see how far that has evolved in that really, 10 years later, we can all go to a truly remote workforce and continue functioning. I think that really will change the fundamental nature of, how much office space we want. It will be probably truly elective. The people who want to come into the office can, but if you prefer to work from home, I think that's going to be perfectly fine. And not that it ever wasn't, but it was certainly not something that really was an option that everyone wanted or felt comfortable taking. I think we will still see, travel will be less essential for business. I do think, what we need to travel for will be really whittled down so that we're not getting on a plane to go to a meeting and coming back. I think there are going to be a lot of people looking at that and saying, that doesn't make a lot of sense, and we can do a lot of this virtually. But I do think that fundamentally, I think, this is about, information and people and how we can manage that. And there's no such thing as a work-life balance. How you are able to manage, living and also contributing in a professional capacity through your job to society. I think, it's very much recognized that doesn't look one way. And, if you are working from home right now and you do not have, childcare, you have to take some time and care for your children, and then you can come back to work. But, the standard 9 to 5 workday has really gone out the window, and I don't know that I see that necessarily coming back.